The night Lily almost walked away forever. The swings in Cokeworth creak in the rain, and the night tastes like rust and regret. Lily Evans stands beneath a flickering street lamp, fingers white around a wet chain, her wand hand trembling just enough that Severus notices. He is on the next swing, soaked through his thin black robes, hair plastered to his face, every line of his body pulled tight around one awful word, mudblood. In canon, this is the moment she walks away forever. But what if she hasn't left yet? What if we freeze the story right here, in the drizzle and petrol-scented dark, and ask what one different sentence could do? The air between them is thick with things unsaid. The metallic tang of the swing set, the distant hum of the mills, the soft slap of raindrops against tarmac, all of it presses in as Severus tries to breathe past the panic clawing at his throat. He knows the Death Eater hopefuls are waiting for him to choose, to laugh it off, to prove that their blood purity jokes are more important than the girl who has always believed in his magic. Lily's eyes are bright, not just with hurt, but with something more profound, the dawning realization that love and loyalty can be pulled in opposite directions. In the canon timeline, he fails this test. He clings to the dark arts, to pureblood approval, and Lily Evans eventually becomes Lily Potter. Harry is born, the prophecy is set in motion, Voldemort comes to Godric's Hollow, and Severus Snape is left with nothing but a dough-shaped Patronus and a lifetime of double agentry to atone. This is the story we know. But this isn't a story about accepting inevitability. This is a story about that fracture line in 5th year, on these dripping swings, and what happens if Severus chooses differently. What if he never said the word at all? Or, more dangerously, what if he said it and then shattered his entire world for her fast enough that she actually believed him? Imagine him standing up in front of his Slytherin friends the next day, voice shaking but clear, telling them that blood means nothing, that Lily Evans is worth more than their Dark Lord's promises. Imagine him here in Cokeworth, right now, blurting out the vow he has always been too afraid to make, that he will never let her stand alone again, that they will face Hogwarts, the war, even Voldemort himself together. Because if Lily Evans becomes Lily Snape instead of Lily Potter, everything bends. The prophecy might seek another child. Harry Potter might never be born, or be born with a different name, a different father, a different bond to the war that defines his life. Dumbledore's plans, James and Sirius's futures, the entire feel of Hogwarts under a man who goes home to the woman he always loved. All of it begins here, with one rain-soaked promise. Tonight, we're exploring that promise. We'll examine how a single apology, a single choice of love over fear, could rewrite the first Wizarding War from the ground up. Most importantly, we'll follow the path where Severus doesn't just love Lily from afar, he marries her. Stay with this moment on the swings, because when he finally speaks, the wizarding world shifts, and then we cut to the title, What If Snape Married Lily Evans? Not erasing canon, why Lily Snape is a rereading, not a rejection. Before we rush into wedding vows and war councils, we need to pause and draw a clear line in the sand. This isn't a story about tearing down James Potter or sneering at canon couples. This is a story about taking the text we already have, the ache that's already there, and asking, what if the road not taken actually kept going? Canon gives us that road. It gives us two children in Cokeworth, sitting on a broken swing set, discovering magic together. It gives us the boy from the abusive home, and the girl from the loving but bewildered family, both outsiders in their own ways, both lit up by the same extraordinary secret. It gives us shared books, shared glances on the Hogwarts Express, shared excitement over spells that make their world wider. That connection is not invented. It's always been there, quietly humming under the louder story. And canon also gives us the fracture. 5th year. Humiliation by the lake. The word mudblood, ripping through the air like a curse Severus can't take back. Yet even after that, the text shows us something more profound. A man who never stops loving her. A doe Patronus that mirrors Lily's, decades later. A life defined by her memory so completely that every risk he takes for Dumbledore, every double agent step through darkness, traces back to Lily Evans. We're exploring an alternate branch that grows from those roots. This isn't fanfiction out of nowhere, it's a plausible divergence. So what are the emotional stakes if Lily becomes Lily Snape instead of Lily Potter? First, Severus's redemption shifts. In canon, he is driven by guilt and grief, by the horror of having delivered the prophecy that led to her death. Here, we'll examine a Severus who is pulled toward the light not as penance, but through partnership. Not, I failed her, but we fight this together. What does it do to a man steeped in dark arts when the person he loves most doesn't die because of him, but chooses him day after day? For Lily, the stakes are just as sharp. This isn't a safe, easy love. Choosing Severus means choosing a man on the edge of Death Eater circles, choosing to believe he can be better, choosing to risk her future on that belief. It is agency, not accident. It is a decision that could save lives, or cost different ones. From that choice flow our core themes: trust earned and broken, the tension between safety and passion, the way love can actually reshape political choices. Does Lily's influence keep Severus from ever taking the dark mark? Does their bond change how he hears the prophecy, how quickly he runs to Dumbledore? Whether Voldemort ever marks a child as his equal? Can love truly rewrite a life already entangled in darkness? Or does darkness rewrite the love? Most importantly, this isn't a timeline where James, Harry, and the others simply vanish. James may become a rival, an uneasy ally, or a man whose bravery plays out on a different battlefield. Harry may be born with a different surname, or not at all, but the idea of the boy who lived still haunts the prophecy. Sirius, Remus, Neville, the Order, every one of them still matters, still bleeds, still changes because Lily chose Severus. Their lives are saved or shattered along new fault lines. That's the promise of this rereading, not erasing canon, but refracting it. From here, we'll step into the first crucial divergence, the moment by the lake when one word doesn't end everything, and a different war begins. Our thesis: how one marriage rewrites a war, a boy, and a legend. So our thesis is simple and terrifying. If Lily Evans marries Severus Snape, we don't just get a different romance, we get a different first wizarding war, a different prophecy outcome, and possibly a world where Harry Potter, as we know him, never exists at all, or exists as someone else entirely. What if the single insult that shattered them in canon never lands? What if Fifth Year by the Black Lake ends not with mudblood and a severed bond, but with an apology accepted, dark arts confronted, and a friendship that refuses to die? From that altered moment, we're exploring an entire new architecture of fate, when love doesn't walk away, when shame doesn't win, when Severus isn't left alone with the people who want the worst in him. This isn't a story about simply swapping James for Severus and watching the same plot unfold with a different surname. This is a story about how one choice of heart refracts an entire war. We'll examine their emotional landscape as a couple first. Can Lily's fierce compassion actually live beside Severus's hunger for power, his rage, his fear? Does he pull her toward darkness, or does she pull him, slowly and painfully, toward something more profound than survival, toward redemption that happens before everything breaks? From there, we widen the frame to the battlefield. In canon, Severus becomes a Death Eater, overhears the prophecy, and drives Voldemort straight at Godric's Hollow. In this timeline, is he still marked, or does Lily's presence derail that path before the Dark Mark ever burns his arm? If he does fall, does she follow him as a spy for the Order, or does he follow her into Dumbledore's camp as a reluctant earlier double agent? We'll trace how that marriage shifts Dumbledore's calculations, the Order's trust, and Voldemort's paranoia. At the center of that web sits the prophecy. A boy born as the 7th month dies. In canon, that boy is Harry, but it could have been Neville. It could have been no one, if Voldemort never hears it. So, we'll ask, step by step, whether Severus still carries that half-heard sentence back to his master, whether Voldemort still marks him as his equal, and whether the child at the heart of the legend is Harry Potter, Harry Snape, Neville Longbottom, or no chosen child at all. Chronologically, we'll move with them. Childhood in Cokeworth, where the girl on the swings and the boy by the riverbank find magic together. Hogwarts years rewritten by a different fifth-year turning point, a Slytherin-Gryffindor bond that actually survives. A war-era marriage forged under the Dark Mark's shadow, or the Order's protection. The night Voldemort comes, or doesn't, and then a reconfigured Hogwarts era, with or without a Harry Snape sitting at the Gryffindor table, watching two professors who share a secret history. Most importantly, this is a story about a question. If someone like Severus Snape is loved early enough, consistently enough, fiercely enough, does he still become the bitter, self-destructive man we know? Or does Lily's choice create a new kind of hero, and a new kind of world? As we move into the lake scene, and its aftermath, we'll start to find out. Fierce versus familiar, defining the Snape-Lily love. We're exploring, and to find out, we have to be precise about the kind of love we're exploring. In canon, Lily and James grow into something warm, bright, eventually almost domestic. The pranks soften, the arrogance burns off, and what's left is a partnership that feels like Gryffindor House made human. Loud laughter, crowded kitchens, a baby on a toy broom, friends dropping by without knocking. Their love settles. It becomes comfortable, public, easy to read from the outside. Snape and Lily would never be that simple. What if, instead of drifting apart after the lake, they fought their way back to each other, not in a neat reconciliation, but in a slow, volatile, high-risk orbit? This is a story about two people who know each other too well. The girl who saw the bruises under Severus's sleeves in Cokeworth, the boy who watched Lily practice magic in the overgrown park and realized she was his way out of the gray. Their bond begins where James can never follow, in shared childhood, in the industrial fog, in the knowledge of what it means to be powerless and hungry, and still somehow enchanted. We'll examine those canon moments that already crackle with something more profound. Lily snapping at James by the lake, not just because he's bullying Severus, but because he is desecrating the one friend who has always taken her seriously. Lily standing in the corridor, furious with Severus for his dark arts crowd because she expected better of him than of herself. On the page, those are the last flares before the bridge burns. Here, they become the first sparks of a different fire. The apology that canon never allows him to finish actually lands. The word mudblood is confronted, dissected, repented for, instead of becoming a permanent scar, and from that point on, their love is not made of grand speeches in the Great Hall. It's built in small, almost invisible gestures. Lily fixing the frayed cuff of his school robe before potions, fingers brushing ink-stained wrist. Severus brewing a precise, unspectacular draft to ease her headaches before exams, leaving the vial on her bedside table in the dormitory with no note. Shared books on the riverbank during summers, Muggle novels, and advanced potions theory stacked together, their shoulders just barely touching as the streetlights flicker on. This isn't a story about perfect compatibility, it's about friction that refines. Lily is light in industrial fog, stubborn and bright, refusing to dim. Severus is the shadow that chooses, deliberately, painfully, to move toward that light instead of away from it. When chaos of war meets the logic of potions, when courage meets cunning, when a born Gryffindor and a Slytherin by choice decide to stand together, they become something worth fighting for. But we should be honest with ourselves. This will never be a fluffy romance. Most importantly, we're exploring the harder choice. The love that costs, the love that demands Severus unlearn his bitterness, and Lily confront the darkness she once dismissed as just Slytherin things. Does that choice make the world better, or does it simply redistribute the tragedy? Hold that question, because as we move from school corridors into the First Wizarding War, the volatile tenderness between them will be tested by the prophecy, by Voldemort, and by the friends who cannot understand why Lily picked the shadow over the stag. From theory to story, how we'll walk this alternate timeline. So how do we actually test that choice? How do we move from abstract tragedy calculus into a world where Lily Evans really does walk toward the shadow instead of the stag, and then has to live there, day after day? From this point on, we're not just talking about them, we're stepping inside their timeline. We're exploring a concrete, lived alternate history, where we follow Lily and Severus year by year, corridor by corridor, all the way from OWL exams to open war. What if one different decision doesn't just change who she kisses under the beech tree, but who stands on which side of a battlefield 10 years later? To make that work, we need rules. This isn't a story about throwing canon out the window and turning Severus Snape into a misunderstood angel. This is a story about holding on to as much canon as possible until the exact instant it breaks, and then asking if these same people, with these same wounds and temptations, were pushed 1 degree to the left, where would they actually go? He still loves power. He still craves respect. He still has that corrosive resentment that makes mudblood believable on his tongue. So we keep Cokeworth. We keep the childhood bond, the shared magic in the playground, the first train ride to Hogwarts. We keep the sorting, Slytherin and Gryffindor, the slow drift as he falls in with future Death Eaters, and she grows closer to James, Remus, and even Sirius. We keep the 5th year humiliation by the lake, the dark arts fascination, the marauders bullying, and the rising whisper of Voldemort in the background. Our divergence is not a neat, happy childhood fix. It's a fracture in the hottest part of the fire. We label it clearly, the catalyst, 5th year, the night after the lake. Not the moment he shouts mudblood, with the whole school watching, but the night that follows, when Canon lets him stew in shame and double down on the people who will always applaud his cruelty. In this version, we follow him into that night. The castle is quiet, but the corridors are still humming with gossip. He has already dabbled in curses in the library's shadows. She is already defending James more often than she admits, but she is not yet in love with him. Outside, Voldemort's mark is becoming a whispered promise. Inside, Severus stands on a knife edge between the friends who expect him to take it, and the girl who has always been his first real connection. Our first concrete scene is not a wedding, not a war council, not a prophecy. It is a single apology, a single public choice, in front of the Slytherins who think they own him, and the Gryffindors who think they know her. Most importantly, it is the moment he has to decide, in full view of both tribes, which side he physically walks toward. When Lily Evans refuses to pretend nothing happened, does he cross the hall to her, or turn his back and take his place among future Death Eaters? Hold that image, because the direction of that one step is about to rewrite everything. Rewriting the Mudblood Night. Severus chooses Lily in public. He does move. Severus feels his body choose before his pride can, one step, then another, away from the cluster of green and silver, away from Mulciber's expectant smirk, away from the echo of Sirius Black's laughter still hanging over the lake like smoke. The courtyard stones are cold through his shoes, rough and damp, anchoring him in this one impossible moment as he turns his back on the boys who think they own him and walks toward the girl who is already walking away. The word is still in his mouth, mudblood. It tastes like bile and iron, like every whispered warning Lily ever gave him about the people he was falling in with. He can feel the eyes on his back, the hissed, "Forget the mudblood, Snape," from Avery, the low mocking, "She's not worth it," from Mulciber. In canon, he would have listened. He would have let humiliation calcify into hatred. But what if just once, shame is stronger than fear? We're exploring that fracture line right here, where his hand actually trembles as he breaks into a run. He catches her in the corridor, where the stone walls trap the last of the marauder's laughter and throw it back at him, thinner, uglier. Lily, his voice cracks. She doesn't stop. Her hair is a banner of furious red, her shoulders rigid, her wand hand clenched. The air smells of lake water and cut grass and something burning out between them. "Don't," she says, without turning. But she does stop. Of course she does. This isn't a story about a girl who doesn't care. This is a story about a girl who has cared too much, for too long. Severus steps in front of her, breathless. Up close, he can see the shine in her eyes, the way her jaw is set, like she's holding back an entire childhood. Cokeworth summers, shared secrets, the first time he showed her she was a witch. All of it balanced on the edge of this apology. "I'm not going to explain it away," he blurts, before he can retreat into excuses. "There is no excuse. I was ashamed, and I thought, if I hurt you first, they couldn't hurt me. I hate that word. I hate that I said it. I hate what it makes me." He swallows, hard. "If you want me to stay away from Mulciber, from Avery, from all of them, I will. I'll walk out of that common room and never sit with them again. Just don't let this be the end of us." Lily studies him, and will examine her silence as its own kind of power. She is furious. That hasn't changed. She is remembering the way he flinched when his father shouted downstairs. The boy who watched her do magic with awe. The boy who always promised he wasn't like the others. "I won't stand next to someone who chooses blood over me," she says quietly, "over anyone like me. If you want to prove you're different, you don't do it here, in a corridor where no one can see. You do it out there, with them watching." It is a line in the stone, a boundary, but not a door slammed shut. So that night, in the Slytherin common room, Severus makes sure there is an audience. Mulciber is bragging about a new prank, a curse he wants to try on a Muggle-born second year. Laughter ripples, low and eager. The fire throws green light over eager, ugly faces. Severus stands. His heart is pounding so hard, he can hear it over the crackle of the flames. "You touch her," he says, voice cutting through the room. "And I'll report you myself, to Slughorn, to Dumbledore. I'm done with your dark arts." The room goes very still. Then Avery sneers, wands come out, and it is 3-on-1. He takes the hit. stinging hex, then something darker that leaves his ribs screaming and his vision swimming, but he does not raise his wand. He lets them mark him as a traitor, not a coward. At the doorway, unseen by most, Lily watches. She sees him stagger but not back down. Here's the word mudblood spat again, this time at him, for daring to choose differently. She doesn't forgive him in that instant, but she does finally believe that he might be willing to burn his bridges for her, and that belief is something more profound, something worth fighting for, that will change the path of the war itself. Because if this is the night he chooses Lily in public, what happens when the Dark Lord comes calling? Butterfly effects, how one apology reshapes Hogwarts, social lines. The castle doesn't forget a scene like that. By breakfast the next morning, Severus's refusal of Mulciber and Avery has spread from the Slytherin table to the Hufflepuff benches and all the way to the Ravenclaw windows. And in that echo, Hogwarts itself begins to tilt. Slytherin reacts first, and it reacts like a wounded animal. The space beside Severus on the green and silver bench stays conspicuously empty. Conversations die when he approaches. Mulciber's stare is all venom, Avery's smile is all threat, and the quieter would-be Death Eaters begin to whisper that Snape is unstable, unreliable, maybe even a traitor. He isn't expelled from the house, of course. Hogwarts doesn't work that way. But socially, he is exiled to the margins, a liminal figure who belongs everywhere and nowhere at once. What if this is the first time Severus realizes that isolation can also be a kind of freedom? Without Mulciber's shadow at his shoulder, without Avery pressing invitations to darker meetings, he starts drifting toward the edges of other houses. He lingers longer at mixed study tables, trades terse comments with a Ravenclaw over arithmancy, shares a rare, brittle joke with a Hufflepuff over a misbrewed potion. He is no Gryffindor, not yet, but he is no longer a core dark arts recruit either, and that ambiguity is dangerous in all the right ways. Lily feels that danger as tension more than thrill. She doesn't run back into his arms. This isn't a story about instant forgiveness washing away years of hurt. This is a story about cautious, deliberate reconnection. She meets him at the far end of a library table, not the middle. She stands with him at the edge of the lake, not their old hidden spot under the beech tree. With every quiet conversation about charms theory, with every shared memory of Cokeworth, she is testing the same question we are. Is this new Severus real, or just a performance born of panic and shame? James, watching from across the common room, hates how complicated everything suddenly becomes. His canon narrative of Sniveluz the future Death Eater has always been so clean, so easy to mock, so easy to fight. Now he has to watch Severus publicly reject Mulciber, watch Lily's eyes soften when she thinks no one is looking, watch a boy he despises actually choose the right side before anyone forces him to. How do you bully someone who just did the brave thing you've always claimed he'd never do? Jealousy and grudging respect twist together into a new, more volatile rivalry. The adults notice too. Dumbledore, who had quietly filed Severus under likely loss to the Dark Lord, now makes a small mental correction. We'll examine this more when the prophecy enters the picture, but for now, he simply watches, wondering whether this wounded Slytherin might one day be an ally. Slughorn, ever the collector, sees danger and promise intertwined. A boy who loves the dark arts in theory, but has just proven he can walk away from dark wizards in practice. Most importantly, this is the moment the emotional groundwork for a different future is laid. Lily begins to believe that Severus can choose her values over his peer group, not just once, but always. Severus, in turn, experiences the strange liberation of stepping off the path everyone assumed he'd take, discovering that love and integrity might actually belong together. And as the war outside Hogwarts darkens, that fragile, extraordinary bond is about to collide with a prophecy that never mentioned his name at all. Slow burn in the corridors, from repaired friendship to first kiss. So what does that fragile, extraordinary bond actually look like inside Hogwarts' stone corridors, when the war is still mostly whispers and headlines? What if, instead of drifting apart after 5th year, 6th year becomes the slow, relentless test of whether love and integrity can really live together under Slytherin green and Gryffindor red? It starts small. It has to. A late-night study session in the library when Newt-level potions has finally outpaced even Lily's natural talent, and Severus quietly slides his annotated copy of Advanced Potion Making across the table. He doesn't boast. He just adjusts her stirring pattern with an ink-stained finger, and she watches the potion shift from dull brown to perfect opalescent sheen. In canon, we know he's brilliant. Here, we're exploring what happens when that brilliance is offered as a gift, not a weapon. From there, the moments accumulate. Lily actually drags him, up to the Gryffindor stands for a Quidditch match, ignoring his muttered complaints about pointless theatrics. He spends the first 10 minutes sneering at James's show-off dives, the next 10 quietly explaining the physics of broom maneuvering, and the last 10 caught off guard when Lily laughs at one of his rare, dry comments and doesn't look away. Shared detentions in the greenhouses, polishing cauldrons side by side in Slughorn's classroom after everyone else has gone, become a running-in joke. At least we're always in trouble together. But this isn't a story about easy redemption. Lily sets conditions, and she means them. No more experimental curses in abandoned classrooms. No more evenings vanishing with the boys who brag about the Dark Lord as if he's a thrilling rumor instead of a real monster. When Severus slips, when an ugly hex scars a Hufflepuff's cheek, she doesn't look away. She corners him by the Black Lake and says very calmly that if he wants to keep her, he has to choose. He calls her naive. She calls him a coward for hiding behind bitterness. And then, in quieter moments, he pushes back, forces her to admit that the Ministry is failing, that not every Slytherin is evil, that the world outside Hogwarts is already gray and bleeding. The pivot comes on a storm-soaked evening in the library. Thunder rattles the windows, rain blurs the grounds, and the Marauder's latest prank, an exploding ink curse that left Severus humiliated in front of half the school, still clings to him like smoke. Lily finds him alone between the potions shelves, shoulders shaking, not with rage this time, but with something closer to despair. He says he is his father's son, that people like him don't get chosen, that she will leave in the end because everyone does. And Lily, for the first time, doesn't just feel protective, she feels pulled, because under all the sharpness, there is a boy who has always loved her and has never believed he deserves anything in return. From that night, the air between them changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but in the way her hand lingers on his wrist when she passes him a quill, in the way his eyes soften when she walks into Slughorn's office. We'll examine one charged afternoon in the potions classroom, when a mismeasured ingredient sends a cauldron flaring violently, glass shattering, fumes filling the air. Severus reacts without thinking, dragging Lily back, shielding her with his own body as the potion erupts. When the smoke clears, they are pressed against the stone wall, his hand still gripping her robes, her heartbeat thundering against his chest. "I'm fine," she whispers, but she doesn't move. Neither does he. The world narrows to the smell of singed hair, the faint sting of potion on skin, the impossible nearness of someone who has always been there and yet never this close. She thanks him, voice shaking, and he says her name like it's a spell he's terrified to cast. The first kiss isn't cinematic. It's hesitant, almost clumsy, a question more than a claim, but it is also a line crossed, a choice made. When their lips meet, briefly, desperately, it feels like stepping off a ledge together, not knowing if there is a net. Most importantly, the kiss does not erase their fractures. Severus still snaps when he feels cornered, still reaches instinctively for dangerous magic when he's afraid. Lily still has friends, Mary, Remus, even Peter, who watch Severus with open distrust. And James Potter, from the Gryffindor table, sees the way Lily's gaze tracks a thin, dark-haired boy at the Slytherin end and realizes, slowly and then all at once, that the girl he has built a future around has already chosen something more profound. So where does that leave the prophecy, the war, and the boy who might never be called Harry Potter at all? That's where this slow-burn corridor romance collides with destiny, and where everything we think we know about the First Wizarding War begins to unravel. Pattern break. What if James Potter never gets the girl? So where does that leave the prophecy, the war, and the boy who might never be called Harry Potter at all? That's where we need to do something unexpected. We need to walk away from Lily and Severus, just for a moment, and stand beside the boy who, in canon, wins. What if James Potter never gets the girl? In the original timeline, James is the golden boy who finally grows up, Quidditch star, effortless charm, the arrogance sanded down by loss and reflection, until Lily can actually see the man beneath the swagger. Here, he does the work. He pulls back on hexes in the corridors. He tries to be better. He learns to listen, and he still watches Lily Evans walk walk past his outstretched hand and take Severus Snape's instead. So what does that do to him? Does rejection crack his ego or clear his vision? This isn't a story about humiliating James. It's a story about what rejection does to someone who has always believed deep down that he will win if he just tries hard enough. We'll examine two paths that twist together into something more profound. On the darker path, James feels threatened. The rival he mocked, dangled upside down, laughed at with Sirius, is now the man Lily loves. Every shared glance between Lily and Severus becomes a mirror held up to his worst moments. That burn in his chest, it can turn into escalation, more taunts, more duels, a desperate attempt to prove that Snape is unworthy, the Marauder's cruelty towards Severus. Without the Lily likes me now victory, risks becoming less about schoolboy fun and more about a war for validation. But there is another path. The one where losing Lily forces James to grow up faster than canon ever required. He looks at her happiness, at the way she shines when Severus is kind and steady instead of brittle and bitter, and he makes a different choice. Most importantly, he decides that her joy matters more than his pride. The energy that once went into elaborate pranks and public performances is redirected into the war, into late-night strategy sessions with Dumbledore, into a fiercer, more protective bond with Sirius, Remus, and even Peter. And then we reach the Order of the Phoenix. Picture the headquarters table, James Potter and Severus Snape on the same side of a rising war, both in love with the same woman, one as her husband, one as the man she turned down. The air between them is volatile, charged, but also useful. James knows Severus's weaknesses from school. Severus knows James's recklessness from every corridor clash. Together they can predict Death Eater tactics with unnerving precision if they can bear to stay in the same room. Lily, in this version, is not a prize passed between rivals. She is the axis they both orbit, the reason they keep showing up. This is a story about a fragile alliance forged out of shared love and shared terror of what Voldemort will do if he wins, and hanging over all of it is the question we can't escape. If James never marries Lily, does he ever become a father at all, or does the prophecy turn its gaze elsewhere and erase Harry Potter from history before he is even born? Graduation and proposal, choosing a life in the shadow of war. So what if, in the very moment childhood ends, they choose each other anyway? The Great Hall is almost unrecognizable. The house banners are coming down, candles drifting higher and higher, as if Hogwarts itself is exhaling. Benches scrape, trunks roll, voices echo, and then thin out until the noise of 7 shared years collapses into an uneasy silence. Lily stands with her hand on the back of a Gryffindor bench, Severus in the shadow of the Slytherin table, and between them is that liminal space we're exploring. No longer students, not yet soldiers, already living in the shadow of a war that has actually begun without waiting for their newt results. On the staff table, a folded Daily Prophet lies abandoned, the headline half visible, "Another Family Missing." In the corridor, someone whispers, "Order of the Phoenix," like it's a password or a prayer. This isn't a story about carefree graduation feasts and bright futures. This is a story about two people who know the future might be measured in months, not decades, and still decide. We stand together. Severus does not propose under enchanted fireworks or in front of cheering classmates. He waits. He watches her say goodbye to Marlene, to Remus, even to James. Awkward, stiff, but real. Then, when the carriages have gone and the sky is heavy with the last light of their last school day, he finds her where he always has, out by the lake, beneath the beech tree that has seen every version of them. His hands shake, but his voice doesn't, not this time. He talks about Cokeworth and the river, about the first moment he saw her make a flower open with a touch. He admits what we already know, that he has walked too close to the edge of the dark arts, that there are names he's heard, marks he's been offered, and then he does something extraordinary for Severus Snape. He draws a line in his own life and steps over it. "No Death Eaters," he says, before she can. "No mark, no master but our own choices. If I falter, you pull me back. If I lie, you leave. I want a life with you, not power, not them, you." The ring is simple, almost plain, a small flash of silver on his ink-stained palm. The real proposal is the vow, to stand with her against the Dark Lord, to make their bond a shield instead of a weapon. And Lily, who has always seen him clearly, does not pretend this is safe. She asks about children, about secrets, about what happens when Voldemort notices that a brilliant half-blood potion maker has refused his call. Her yes is not a breathless, naive surrender. It is a negotiation of terms. No secrets that endanger children, no excuses for cruelty. They fight for the same side, or they do not fight together at all. Only when he accepts every condition without flinching does she take his hand and the word finally comes. Yes, their engagement party, if we can even call it that, is held in the cramped back room of the Evans house, with Petunia refusing to attend and a wireless muttering fresh disappearances between clinking teacups. A few Order members come: Marlene, Remus, a wary Dumbledore who studies Severus like he's reading a volatile potion. There is love in the room, but also contingency plans. Most importantly, everyone understands this might be the only celebration they ever get. When they choose a home, they do it deliberately away from Godric's Hollow, away from the legend that in canon will one day be built there. A modest cottage on the edge of a Muggle town, close enough to Cokeworth's river that the air smells faintly of water and metal, not a hero's birthplace, a refuge. One night, long after the last congratulations have faded, Lily sits at a small kitchen table. On a scrap of parchment, she writes Lily Evans. Then, beneath it, Lily Snape. She traces the new name once, twice, feeling how it changes the shape of her life. It is either a protection, hiding her from a prophecy that hasn't yet chosen its target, or a bright clear mark saying, this is where to aim. And as the ink dries, the war moves closer, already deciding what that name will cost. Lily Snape and the First Wizarding War, a different kind of power. Couple. The ink on Lily Snape's name is barely dry when war stops being a headline and becomes a daily calculation. Who do you trust? How far do you go? What do you sacrifice first? Safety or sleep? In canon, Severus walks into the war as a Death Eater, then claws his way back out through guilt and grief. But what if, this time, he never crosses that line? What if instead of offering Dumbledore a broken, penitent spy, the war offers him something rarer, a married pair who walk in already aligned, already bound, already determined to stand together? This isn't a story about Lily saving Severus from himself with the power of love. It's about two people weaponizing their bond with terrifying precision. Dumbledore looks at Severus and sees Slytherin, the boy who knows who is being recruited, which families are wavering, which corridors in Nocturne Alley lead to whispered oaths. He looks at Lily and sees something else entirely. The witch who brewed antidotes in Slughorn's classroom for fun, who could have been a healer, who understands the logic of charms, the way some people understand music. So we're exploring a different war map. By day, Lily is at St. Mungo's, or in a hidden workshop, developing counter curses for the Cruciatus variants starting to appear on victims, layering experimental protections onto safe houses for Muggle-born families. She argues with Moody about the placement of wards, refines Dumbledore's defensive spells, writes meticulous notes that become the Order's unofficial manual on how to survive a Darkmark raid. By night, Severus slips back into the shadows he once romanticized. He drinks in the same pubs as future Death Eaters, trades gossip about bloodlines, lets Lucius Malfoy think he is merely biding his time before taking the mark. He is not a penitent double agent, he is a proactive one, entering the game early, feeding Dumbledore recruitment lists, meeting locations, the names of new curses before they hit the field, and between those lives, there is the kitchen table, the arguments, the way love becomes both armor and exposed nerve. Severus wants to go deeper, to maintain the illusion so completely that even Dumbledore flinches. Lily, reading the casualty reports she helped write, refuses to let him be another name on that list. How many nights do they spend circling the same question? When does necessary risk become self-destruction? When does protecting each other threaten everyone else? Dumbledore, for his part, walks a knife edge. With this Severus, he does not have to wait for remorse to make him useful. He has a Slytherin insider from the start, and Lily as both anchor and strategist. But most importantly, he has a weakness in duplicate. Harm one, and the other might break. Is that something worth fighting for, or a liability he cannot afford? And then, there is the night at the Hog's Head. In canon, Severus is there as a Death Eater in training, eavesdropping for Voldemort. In this timeline, does he still choose that doorway? Does Dumbledore quietly send him, trusting his occlumency? Or does Severus go on his own, hungry for leverage? When the words about a boy born as the 7th month dies drift through the crack in the door, who does he think of first? The Dark Lord he is pretending to serve, the headmaster he officially serves, or the woman whose new surname is already a target? We'll examine that choice next, because what he does with the prophecy might be the single moment that decides whether this war bends toward victory or tragedy wearing a different face. The prophecy, without Harry, who becomes the chosen one now? In canon, that choice leads him straight to the Hog's Head, and through him, straight to Voldemort. But what if the name on his heart changes the direction of his feet? What if, the moment he hears born as the 7th month dies, he thinks not of power, but of Lily, of Dumbledore, of the fragile hope they're all clinging to together? To understand how extraordinary that divergence is, we have to sit with the prophecy itself. It never says Harry Potter. It speaks of the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, a boy born as the 7th month dies, to parents who have thrice defied Voldemort. In canon, that description fits 2 children, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom. The only reason it narrows to Harry is because Voldemort, through Snape, chooses to believe it does. So in this timeline, with Lily Snape instead of Lily Potter, we're exploring who the prophecy can still cling to, and whether it ever touches a child of hers at all. Because Lily and Severus may not even have a child yet. They're young, at war, and painfully aware of what children cost in a world like this. Maybe they're trying, maybe they've lost a pregnancy, maybe they've decided to wait until the mark on Severus's arm means less than the ring on his finger. Harry Snape is possible, yes, a boy with Lily's eyes and Severus's name, born in late July, but it is not inevitable. This isn't a story about destiny forcing a baby into the timeline just to keep canon comfortable. This is a story about choice under fire. So imagine Severus still at the Hog's Head, still pressed against that door, still catching only the first half of the prophecy before Aberforth throws him out. In canon, he runs to Voldemort. Here, newly married, newly tethered to Lily's love, he runs to Dumbledore instead. He arrives wild-eyed in the headmaster's office, not as a spy bearing a gift, but as a terrified husband with a weapon he doesn't understand. Together they reconstruct what he heard. Together they decide who needs protection, not who needs to be sacrificed. And Voldemort, without Snape as his loyal informant, he learns of the prophecy later, or from a less precise source, perhaps through Trelawney's own reputation, perhaps through another Death Eater who hears only rumors of a child destined to defeat him. His reaction is the same and yet more scattered: paranoia, obsession, an almost superstitious fixation on July births and defiant families. The Potters are still high on his list. So are the Longbottoms. But there is no clean line from Snape's panic to Godric's Hollow now. Most importantly, if Lily is not a Potter, Voldemort's choice shifts. Does he still see James and Lily's hypothetical child as the greatest threat, or does he turn his gaze fully on Frank and Alice Longbottom, making Neville the boy who lived, while Lily and Severus survive into a darker, more complicated future? And if Neville is marked instead, what exactly does that let Severus Snape become? We'll examine that next, because the world where Neville is chosen doesn't just save Lily, it rewrites who stands in Harry's empty place. Pattern interrupt. Imagine a world with no Harry Potter at all. So let's push this further than feels comfortable. What if, in saving Lily Evans, we quietly erase the name Harry Potter from the story altogether? Sit with that for a moment. No messy black hair in a cupboard under the stairs. No lightning scar. No first glimpse of Hogwarts through his eyes. In this branch of the timeline, Lily never marries James, and if she and Severus delay, or struggle, or simply decide they are not ready for children during the war, the boy called Harry Potter might actually never be born. This isn't a story about a technical continuity error. This is a story about emotional gravity shifting under our feet, because if there is no Harry, the camera pulls back. The saga stops being a coming-of-age tale and becomes brutally an adult war drama. The focus locks onto the generation above: Lily and Severus, James and Sirius, Remus and Peter, Dumbledore and Voldemort, colliding without a child hero to center and soften the narrative. There is gain here. Lily lives. She does not die on a nursery floor, begging for her child. Severus is not destroyed by the sound of her falling, not forced into a lifetime of penance and self-loathing, anchored to a boy who wears her eyes. Their bond, however fragile or extraordinary, exists in the present tense instead of as a ghost. Imagine them together at an order meeting, shoulders touching, arguing with Dumbledore as equals instead of as martyrs or tools. But the cost? The cost is that we lose the story we know by heart. No trio huddled in the common room. No time turner rescue, no DA in the room of requirement, no final walk into the forest with a resurrection stone. The emotional language of the war changes. It stops being about a child forced to become more than a symbol and becomes about adults who were never allowed to be children in the first place. Yet the prophecy still hangs over everything, cold and precise. A boy born as the 7th month dies. In a world with no Harry, that line swings fully onto Neville Longbottom. Voldemort's fear has to go somewhere, so we're exploring a Godric's Hollow that might stay quiet while a very different house is attacked. Maybe it's the Longbottom's sitting room, baby toys scattered, Augusta's spare bedroom waiting upstairs. Maybe Neville survives with a different scar, a different kind of fame, and guardianship that is stern, proud, and utterly unprepared for raising a symbol. Without Harry, Dumbledore's long game fractures and redistributes. He cannot place all his hopes in one boy with his mother's eyes. He must invest more heavily in Neville, in the Order as a collective, and, most importantly, in the living variables he never had before. Severus and Lily together. Does he train them as co-strategists? Does he trust Severus differently when Lily is at his side, refusing to let him vanish into the dark arts? The burden of Chosen One starts to smear, to spread, to become something more profound than a single child's destiny, and here is the pattern interrupt. We are not choosing one branch and discarding the other. From this point on, we'll examine both futures in parallel, the world where Harry never exists, and Neville stands where he once would have stood, and the variant where Lily and Severus do finally have a child who grows up not as a Potter, but as a Snape. What does it mean to inherit that name, that love, that history? What does it mean when the boy at the center of the war is not Harry at all? We'll step into that next, and the comparison may be the sharpest magic of all. Neville the Marked, a different nursery, the same Dark Lord. So when the prophecy finally ignites, when Voldemort chooses his marked equal, it is not a child in Godric's Hollow at all. It is a baby in a modest house, in the shadow of a different village hill, a Longbottom instead of a Potter, and the legend of that Halloween night tilts on its axis before it even begins. What if we step into that house instead? Frank and Alice Longbottom, battle-hardened Aurors, are not hiding in a picture-perfect cottage, but in a home that looks like it could withstand a siege. Reinforced wards, reinforced windows, reinforced nerves. The Fidelius charm is there, yes, but Dumbledore has chosen a different configuration. No sentimental gambles with a best friend this time. The Secret Keeper is a Laster moody, paranoid, relentless, the one man Frank actually trusts to suspect everyone. And yet, canon has taught us one brutal lesson. No charm is perfect when fear and ambition are involved. Maybe the leak comes not from Moody himself, but from a chain of surveillance and betrayal around him, a Death Eater who tracks his movements, a pattern in his visits, a gap in the wards, exploited at last. The result is the same. One moment the Longbottoms are settling Neville into his crib, whispering promises about a safer tomorrow. The next, the air tears open with green light. We're exploring a night where Frank duels in the hallway, where Alice's spells crackle like lightning down the stairs, where the dark mark blooms over a house that was supposed to be unbreakable. Voldemort glides through the front door as if invited, amused by their resistance, irritated by their courage. And upstairs, in a room painted with soft colors and clumsy hope, baby Neville cries. Where are Lily and Severus in this rewritten history? Not under attack, not the center. Perhaps they are on an order mission with Kingsley, patrolling the outskirts of another suspected target when the mark flares in the distant sky. Wrong village, wrong silhouette, and yet horribly familiar. Perhaps they are at Spinner's End, Lily reading by lamplight while Severus paces, when the call comes through the Patronus network, Longbottoms. Now, they arrive too late to stop the killing curse, but not too late to see what it leaves behind. This isn't a story about a mother's body on a nursery floor that belongs to her. It's a story about Lily Snape stumbling through shattered wards into someone else's nightmare, seeing Alice's wand broken, Frank crumpled, and Voldemort, what's left of him, already ripped from the room by the rebound of his own magic. Neville lives. The crib is scorched, the wall behind him blasted, but the baby is there, wailing, with a jagged mark on his forehead that is not a lightning bolt but a twisted, branching scar, like a cracked leaf. Most importantly, Lily feels two shocks at once: relief, vicious and shameful that it was not her house, and guilt, suffocating, that the curse chose another child. Severus, standing in the doorway with soot on his face, understands that same duality. He has spent years trying to divert the Dark Lord's gaze from Lily. Now he watches the mythology of the war wrap itself around Neville instead, the boy who lived, the symbol everyone will cling to. Strategically, the fallout is almost identical, and yet absolutely different. Voldemort's body is destroyed. His followers scatter, half believing he will return, half broken by the loss of their master. The wizarding world wakes up to a new icon, and all the hopes that once might have crystallized around a hypothetical Potter child now condense around Neville Longbottom, a boy raised by a grandmother, whispered about in Diagon Alley, studied in Dumbledore's office. But Lily and Severus do not die for this legend, they survive it. They walk out of that ruined house as traumatized adults in a post-war landscape, not as ghosts trapped in someone else's story. And that survival is its own dangerous magic, because it means they have to live with the knowledge that the prophecy passed them by. This time, we'll examine that quiet, brutal aftermath in the place where all wizarding tragedies eventually converge, St. Mungo's. Picture the ward a few days later. Frank and Alice in beds, minds already fraying from what Bellatrix and her companions did in their desperation to find their vanished master. Augusta Longbottom, rigid in a visitor's chair, refusing to cry, and in a small side room, away from the reporters and the order meetings, Lily holds Neville. It's an almost unbearably intimate moment. The war is technically over. The boy who lived is asleep in her arms, his tiny fingers gripping the edge of her robe like he already knows how to hold on. His scar is healing, but it will never fade. She rocks him without thinking, the way she once imagined rocking her own son, the way some part of her still hopes she might, one day. Severus stands in the doorway. He doesn't enter. He watches the line of Lily's jaw, the way her eyes track Neville's breathing, the way her wand hand, this hand that has cast so many spells of protection and attack, now simply supports the weight of a sleeping child. What kind of world will this boy inherit, he wonders, when the Dark Lord is gone, but the fear he created is not? When every step Neville takes at Hogwarts will be measured against a night he can't remember, when every friendship, every failure, every triumph is weighed against that scar, and beneath that, a quieter, more dangerous question hums between Lily and Severus like a shared spell. If they have children of their own, will those children always live in Neville's shadow? Will the name Snape ever belong to anything but war, regret, and the love that survived both? That is something more profound than a simple happy ending. It is something worth fighting for, and it will shape every choice they make as they step into peacetime, haunted not by death, but by the future that almost was, and the future they still might build. Post-war Snape, a husband, not a haunted widower. Peace, when it finally comes, is almost louder than war. In canon, we know what fills that silence for Severus Snape. Lily is dead. The prophecy has played out in Godric's Hollow, and every breath he takes afterward is a kind of penance. He staggers into Dumbledore's office, begging for her life, and then, too late, begging for a way to make her death mean something. From that moment, his trajectory is fixed, bound by guilt, shackled to a promise, defined by the double life that follows. Spy for the Order, Death Eater in Voldemort's ranks. Reluctant guardian of the boy who looks like James and has Lily's eyes. This isn't a story about that haunted widower. This is a story about what if he walks out of the war with Lily still alive, her hand still in his, and the mark on his arm still burning with everything he did to get them there. He is no less scarred. He has still stood in smoky drawing rooms, still watched people die, still carried messages between monsters. But now, when the mission ends, he apparates not to a lonely cottage or a dungeon office, but to a small house where Lily Snape is waiting, wand on the table, tea gone cold, eyes sharp and soft at once. She knows the worst of him. She chose him anyway. That single fact begins to rewrite the script in his head. In canon, he clings to the idea that he is a monster, who can only ever atone. Here, in this fragile peacetime, he is a man trying trying not to flinch when Harry Longbottom's name is on the Prophet's front page, trying not to check the sky for the dark mark every night, trying to believe that a future is something you live, not something you lose. But peace has its own tensions, doesn't it? We're exploring a marriage that has to learn how to exist without the war that forged it. Lily pushes. She wants him to teach, to take the potions post Dumbledore keeps hinting at, to stand in a classroom and build something instead of only destroying. Severus resists. Does he really want to spend his days with children who might one day wear the masks he once wore? Do they tell their future son or daughter every detail of the past? Or do they lock certain nights away and call that protection? Here, Dumbledore's leverage is different. Without Lily's death as a chain, their bond is less confession and more negotiation. We'll examine a headmaster who approaches Snape not as a broken penitent, but as a dangerous, brilliant ally. Teach, Dumbledore might say, on your terms. Keep your independence, but when shadows stir, you will stand with us. And Severus, with Lily's fingers laced through his under the table, can actually argue back. Most importantly, this version of Snape has something more profound than a vow made over a dead woman. He has mornings with Lily's hair on his pillow. He has a half-finished nursery down the hall, or at least the possibility of one. He has love that is not a memory, but a living, infuriating, extraordinary presence. So when whispers begin, rumors that the Dark Lord was not entirely destroyed, that certain followers are restless, his fear cuts deeper than in canon, because now, if Voldemort rises again, Severus does not just risk his soul, he risks the life he was never meant to have, and that is something worth fighting for. The question is, when the Second War calls, which part of Severus Snape answers first? The spy, the husband, or the father he might yet become? Lily at Hogwarts, professor, healer, or something in between. So if the Second War does return, who exactly is Lily Snape by then? Is she the quiet power behind the potions master, or is she standing beside him in the corridors of Hogwarts, wand in hand, reshaping what the castle even feels like to grow up in? We're exploring a future where Lily survives the First War and refuses to fade into domestic safety. She has too much talent, too much fire. In one branch of this timeline, she goes to St. Mungo's, becoming a healer in the Janus Thicky ward, specializing in curse damage and long-term trauma. Imagine Lily sitting with victims of the Cruciatus, inventing gentler potions, weaving charms and potions together to pull minds back from the edge. This isn't a story about her stepping away from the fight, it's a story about her turning war wounds into a vocation. But what if she chooses Hogwarts instead? In another version, Dumbledore looks at this brilliant Muggleborn who defied Voldemort and says, teach them. Maybe she takes charms, her natural gift. Maybe, more radically, she takes Muggle studies and quietly blows the syllabus apart. No longer a patronizing overview of the quaint Muggle world, but a hard look at electricity, law, systemic prejudice. In either case, Lily and Severus on staff together is an extraordinary pattern break. The cold, acerbic potions master, and the warm, incisive witch who married him, moving through the same stone corridors, sharing late-night patrols, arguing about curriculum over tea, while portraits pretend not to listen. Student life changes instantly. Muggleborns and half-bloods walk into Lily's classroom and see a professor who looks them in the eye, who actually knows what it felt like to be called mudblood, and chose to burn that word out of her life. Slytherins see something they have never seen in canon, their head of house's wife, a Muggleborn, sitting at the high table, laughing with him in quiet, private moments, and then docking them points without mercy when they sneer about blood. The emotional climate softens in some corridors. Lily's office becomes the place you go when you're scared or ashamed, and sharpens in others, because now there is a visible line in the sand. Blood prejudice is not just abstractly wrong. It is an insult to the woman the feared Professor Snape loves, and Severus himself. That contrast becomes legend. In class, he is still strict, still terrifying, still that clipped voice warning that dunderheads will blow their eyebrows off, but the edges are different. He cannot quite justify casual cruelty when the woman who forgave his worst moment walks the same halls. Students whisper about the way his shoulders relax when Professor Lily Snape, joins him at the staff table, about the rare, fleeting softness when they pass each other in the dungeons. They start to see that the man who snarls at them in potions also spends evenings in Lily's classroom, helping her ward the windows, planning protections together. Most importantly, when whispers of Voldemort's return begin, Hogwarts does not just have one bitter spy. It has a bonded pair of war veterans who remember what it cost them the first first time. 2 minds, 2 wands, one shared vow to never let their students become cannon fodder again. The question is, when the castle itself becomes a battlefield, how far will the Snapes go to turn Hogwarts from a target into a fortress, and what will that demand from the next generation standing beneath their protection? Pattern break. Meet the child of Lily and Severus Snape. But before we watch that fortress stand or fall, we need to step through a different door entirely. What if, a few quiet years after Voldemort's defeat, the question at the heart of their lives stopped being how to survive the war, and became who they might bring into the world that followed? This isn't a story about battle plans and classroom wards anymore. This is a story about a small terraced house in Cokeworth, or a snug cottage near Hogsmeade, where the most dangerous object in the room is a half-assembled crib that keeps trying to bite Severus Snape. He stands in the middle of the nursery, wand in hand, frowning at the floating pieces. The instructions, some dreadful hybrid of IKEA diagram and ministry safety pamphlet, keep folding themselves shut. A side rail spins the wrong way. A screw transfigures into a beetle and skitters off. Lily leans in the doorway, one hand on the curve of her pregnant belly, laughing as she corrects his wand movements. A flick instead of a jab, a soft word instead of a bark. Together, they coax the crib into shape, wood settling with a final, gentle click, and then the pattern breaks. The joking fades. Severus rests his hand against her stomach, fingers splayed, as if he can shield the child from everything outside these 4 walls. He doesn't look at Lily when he says it. "I don't know how to be anything other than my father," he admits, voice low, almost ashamed. "What if I only know how to hurt what I love?" Lily covers his hand with hers. She reminds him this is not canon repeating itself. He has already broken the cycle by choosing her, by choosing the order, by choosing to help end the war. Most importantly, she tells him, their child will grow up in a house where love is spoken aloud, where anger is named, where silence is not a punishment but a pause. Naming becomes its own kind of battle and its own kind of healing. Do they choose a traditional wizarding name to anchor their child in Severus's reclaimed heritage, a muggle name to honor Lily's world, and the future they want their child to move through without fear, or something that carries their past inside it? Eileen to redeem his mother's line, Tobias as a defiant rewrite, or even a middle name like James, an almost painful olive branch toward the man who died in the war they helped to end. Whatever they decide, the name is a thesis statement. Our child will not be defined by blood status, by house, by prophecy, only by the choices they make. We'll examine how the war refuses to stay in the past. Lily is fiercely protective, watching for every shadow in the corridor, but determined not to smother, not to raise a child who only knows the world as threat. Severus is hyper-vigilant in a different way, layering wards, teaching secrecy and safety far earlier than most parents would. To outsiders, he might seem strict. To this child, the rules are a language of fear and love tangled together, because their greatest victory has become their greatest vulnerability. This tiny life is something more profound than any spell they cast in Dumbledore's office, something worth fighting for again if the darkness ever returns. And that is the question hanging over the crib like an invisible mobile. If Voldemort, or something like him, finds a way back, does this child become a target not because of a prophecy, but because of who their parents are and what they once did to bring him down? Growing up, a Snape. Childhood in the shadow of 2 wars. So what does it actually mean to grow up with that invisible mobile spinning over your crib, humming with old wars and older names? What if your bedtime stories are not fairy tales, but carefully edited memories of the first time your parents nearly died for the world? From a child's eye level, the Snape household is not tragic, it's extraordinary. Shelves that, to an adult, are a potions master's meticulously labeled inventory become, to small hands, a forest of glass and shadow, jars of shimmering beetle eyes, vials of moon-pale liquid, sprigs of herbs hanging like upside-down trees. Next to them, because Lily insisted, are muggle novels with cracked spines and soft pages that smell of ink and rain. This isn't a story about a cold dungeon bat. This is a story about a house where the kitchen table holds both potion schematics and half-finished crossword puzzles. Lily moves through it all like a quiet comet. She smells like flowers and spell smoke, like cut grass and ozone after a storm, and when she laughs, the wards seem to relax. Severus, in public, is the man Hogwarts knows. Precise, cutting, impossible to read. But at night, when the house is dim and the child is in pajamas clutching a threadbare stuffed Kneasel, he sits on the edge of the bed and reads. His voice is low and rough, catching occasionally on certain words, but he never stops. Sometimes it's a Muggle story Lily loved as a girl. Sometimes it's a Bowdlerized account of a mission with the Order, turned into an adventure where everyone makes it home. Compare that to Canon Harry. No cupboard under the stairs here, no Dursleys, no desperate ignorance where magic arrives like an explosion. This child grows up knowing exactly what a wand can do, what a dark mark means, why people still flinch at the name Voldemort. They learn early that love and choices toppled a monster once, and that their parents paid in scars and sleepless nights. Safety is real, so is the cost of it, and that becomes the tension at the center of their childhood. Lily wants playgrounds and birthdays and scraped knees that come from climbing trees, not dueling dummies. Severus insists on shield charms before long division, on recognizing a curse before reciting the alphabet. Who do you trust? Who do you never turn your back on? The child doesn't yet grasp why their surname makes adults pause, why Snape lands differently in every room, but they feel it. A weight, a question they are always silently being asked. Where do James, Sirius, and Remus fit into this fragile balance? We're exploring a world where those names are not legends and chocolate frog cards, but complicated presences at the dinner table. Maybe there are Uncle James visits, tense but trying, where Quidditch brooms lean awkwardly in the corner while Severus makes tea that is just a bit too strong. Maybe Sirius arrives with loud jokes that trail off when he catches Snape's eye, and Remus stays the latest, talking softly with Lily about old friends and new wounds. Does the child notice the way the air shifts when their mother and James share a glance that is full of what-ifs and never-weres? Of course they do. Children always notice the silences adults think they've hidden. This isn't a story about simple forgiveness. It's about a web of history the next generation has to grow up inside. And through it all, Hogwarts hovers on the horizon like a promise and a threat. There are letters from older students Lily healed during the war, describing the moving staircases and the Black Lake. There are glimpses of the castle in Severus's memories when he lets his guard down and tells a rare, dryly fond story about a disastrous first-year potion. The child lies awake, imagining the Great Hall's ceiling, the Sorting Hat's song, the taste of pumpkin juice, but there's a knot in their stomach too. What does it mean to walk into a school where your father is feared and your mother is beloved, or where both are whispered about as legends? Will teachers see you, or only the shadows of who came before? Will classmates reach for your hand, or recoil from your name? Most importantly, when that Hogwarts letter finally arrives, thick parchment, emerald ink, destiny in an envelope, do they feel chosen, or conscripted into a story that began long before they were born? That's the question waiting at the window with the owl, and it will shape everything about the moment they first step onto the Hogwarts Express. Hogwarts, Year 1, sorting the child of a Slytherin-Gryffindor marriage. The train is already moving when the whispers begin. Snape's kid, passed like contraband down the corridor of the Hogwarts Express, traded between compartments where older students lean into the glass and try to catch a glimpse. Are they a Slytherin prodigy, all sharp cheekbones and sharper hexes? Or a Gryffindor rebel, proof that Lily Evans finally burned the green out of Severus Snape's veins? In their compartment, the child of this impossible marriage sits alone, knees drawn up, trunk still half-latched. Two scarves lie folded beside them, one striped red and gold, one green and silver, both knitted by the same careful hands. Lily had pressed them into their arms at the barrier, Severus had said nothing at all, and now, with the fields blurring past, it feels like those colors are weights, not gifts. What if your entire first journey to Hogwarts is less about discovery and more about being observed? Every time the door slides open, someone peeks in, hesitates at the sight of the hooked nose that echoes Severus, the eyes that echo Lily, and backs out with a muttered, "That's them." No one asks their name. The name has already been decided. By the time the boats glide toward the castle and the first years file into the Great Hall, the question has become a pressure in their chest. Slytherin like father, Gryffindor like mum, or something worse. Something that proves they don't belong to either story. The Sorting Hat settles over their ears, and the world narrows to cloth and voice. Well, it murmurs, amused. This is extraordinary. A flash of green, Severus's ambition, his ruthless clarity, his talent for survival. You'd do well in Slytherin, the hat muses. You see the angles, you read the room, you know how to turn fear into leverage. That's your father's legacy. Then a rush of scarlet, Lily's defiance, her willingness to stand in front of a friend and say no, even to the people she loved. There's courage here, the Gryffindor kind. You'd leap between wand and target before you thought twice. That's your mother. But the hat doesn't stop. It tastes the questions that have kept them up at night, the quiet hunger to understand potions the way Severus does, charms the way Lily did. Ravenclaw flickers, blue and bronze, promising answers, and beneath all that, stubborn as a heartbeat, is something more profound, a refusal to let anyone be reduced to a name, a house, a family feud. Hufflepuff glows warm and steady. This isn't a story about choosing one parent over the other, the hat whispers. This is a story about who you are when no one is watching. They swallow. I don't want to be a weapon, they think, or a symbol. I want... The thought catches, raw. I want people to be safe, together. The hat sighs, almost fond. Then it had better be Hufflepuff. The word slams into the hall like a miscast spell. For a heartbeat, everything stops. This was not in the script, not Slytherin's heir, not Gryffindor's proof of concept. Hufflepuff? The table of badgers erupts first, clapping, cheering, making space. A Weasley cousin, Freckles, open grin, shoves aside a plate, and yells, "Oi, over here." A Longbottom relative, round-faced and nervous, offers a shy wave. At the Slytherin table, a Malfoy boy narrows his eyes, recalculating. At Gryffindor, someone whispers, "Lily's kid?" in Hufflepuff? The narrative fractures. The houses don't know what to do with this. Lily's hand flies to her mouth, eyes bright with something like relief and worry tangled together. She had feared Slytherin's shadows, braced for Gryffindor's expectations. She had not prepared for this quiet, radical third path. Severus does not move. From the staff table, he watches their slow walk toward yellow and black, the way they hesitate, then smile, actually smile, when the Weasley cousin slaps their back and the Longbottom offers pumpkin pasties as a peace offering. Only then do they look up. Across the great hall, their father's gaze catches theirs. For a suspended moment, the world is only that connection. Dark eyes, unreadable, then flickering, just once, with pride, fear, and a fleeting, fragile relief, as if some terrible future has been delayed. They don't understand why it matters so much. Not yet, but we're exploring what happens when one's sorting changes not just a child's path, but a war's. And the first hint of that answer is already walking toward them, threading through the Hufflepuff benches, carrying a name they never expected to hear, because someone else is at Hogwarts tonight too, and their story with the Snapes is about to begin. Clash of Legacies, the Snape child, Neville, and the new Hogwarts trio, Neville. Longbottom walks into Hogwarts not as the shy boy we remember from canon, but as the legend everyone has already decided he must be. The boy who lived, the child Voldemort failed to kill. And somewhere across the hall, the Snape child watches him, carrying a different kind of weight, the weight of two war heroes who actually stood beside Neville's parents the night everything went wrong. What if the prophecy chose Neville, and the war still carved the same scars into the world, but the stories people tell about it shifted? Augusta has raised him on tales of Frank and Alice's courage, Dumbledore's strategy, Lily's brilliance, Severus's espionage. So when Neville sits under the Sorting Hat, he's already measuring himself against parents who defied Voldemort 3 times, and against the quiet Slytherin at the Hufflepuff table, whose parents brewed the potions that kept his alive. This isn't a story about an effortless alliance. It's a story about 2 children staring at each other across a classroom and wondering, almost at the same moment, do you understand what it is to never feel like enough? In one version, they bond early, paired in potions by a professor who assumes the Snape child will carry the lesson. Neville's hands shake, the cauldron nearly curdles, and instead of mocking him, that soft, precise voice says, "My mum blew up her first cauldron too." The connection is fragile, but real. In another, more volatile version, Neville flinches every time a teacher praises the Snape child's essay as worthy of Lily Evans, or marvels at their instinct for defensive magic. Just like Severus in the war. How many times can you hear that before you start to resent the echo? Before you ask, in the privacy of your own mind, why the chosen one never seems to be the most impressive person in the room? We'll examine how a new trio, or even a quartet, forms around that tension. Picture Neville in Gryffindor, shouldering prophecy and expectations. The Snape child in Hufflepuff or Slytherin, caught between light and shadow, a Weasley cousin, reckless, warm, desperate to prove they're more than a hand-me-down, and a brilliant Muggleborn who refuses to let old pureblood narratives define them. Not Harry, Ron, Hermione, but when courage meets legacy, when war meets peace, when prophecy meets those who were never named in it, classrooms become battlegrounds of memory. Flitwick beams at Lily's child and hands out points too quickly. McGonagall is almost severe, determined that no one whisper favoritism. A former Death Eater's son mutters slurs under his breath, blaming Severus for betraying their parents. A survivor of the Order stares a little too long, seeing Lily's eyes and remembering nights in Godric's Hollow. The Snape child sits in the middle of all of this, trying to take notes while everyone else writes their parents' war over their life. Most importantly, we're exploring inherited stories. Harry inherited James the Prankster, and Lily the Saint. This child inherits Severus the bully, Severus the hero, Lily the angelic Muggleborn, Lily the controversial woman who chose a Slytherin over a Marauder. Which version do they believe? Which does Neville believe, when his own parents' fate is tangled with the Snape's choices? And then comes the pattern interrupt. The first time Neville, overwhelmed and furious, says out loud, "I'm not your symbol," and the Snape child quietly answers, "I'm not their apology." In that moment, they stop being legends and start being children. Children who might actually stand together, or break apart in ways that change Hogwarts forever, because the war isn't finished with them yet, it's only changed its battlefield. Echoes of the Chamber, a new crisis, a different response. The war has changed its battlefield, and Hogwarts feels it first. In late autumn of their second year, the whispers begin. A Ravenclaw girl found rigid in a corridor, eyes wide, breathing but unreachable. Strange puddles of water with no source. And then the message, written in a jagged, dripping script that seems to pulse in the torchlight. The air rises. The school is not safe. What if we watched a Chamber of Secrets-style crisis unfold in a castle where Lily and Severus are not distant legends, but present tense adults, professors, parents, and most importantly, people who refuse to let children carry the weight alone? In canon, the panic grows in the gaps, silence from authority, rumors racing ahead of truth. Here, the staff meeting that night is a clash of philosophies and love. Lily's voice is steady but blazing, full disclosure to parents, escorts between classes, patrols doubled. They are children, Albus. They deserve to know what we know. Severus, arms folded, eyes like obsidian, argues for containment. Controlled information, targeted protections, no public announcements that could turn fear into hysteria, or a hunting ground for whoever is behind this. They are both right, and they are both terrified, because somewhere between Hufflepuff and Slytherin corridors, their own child walks these halls. When the second attack comes, terror stops being theoretical. A Hufflepuff boy, petrified outside an abandoned girl's bathroom, water everywhere. And there, half-soaked, wand in hand, is the Snape child, shaking, wide-eyed, whispering that they just heard something move in the pipes. The corridor fills with students before Filch can drive them back. You can feel the shift. "Of course it's them," someone mutters. "Snape's kid. Dark arts in the blood." The name that has always been a shadow becomes a spotlight. The Snape child's throat closes. For a heartbeat, they can actually feel the shape of the monster everyone expects them to be. Lily arrives first. She doesn't roar. She kneels, wet robes soaking up the icy water, and takes her child's hand in front of everyone. "Look at me," she says, voice low but unshakable. "You are safe. You are not alone. You are not this." Behind her, Severus looms like a storm, his stare slicing through the crowd until the whispers die. He cannot protect his child from suspicion, but he can make it clear that anyone who acts on it will answer to him. Here is where Dumbledore changes. In canon, he quietly leans on Harry, nudging a boy toward a basilisk. In this timeline, with Harry Potter never the chosen center of the narrative, the headmaster makes a different choice. He does not ask Neville and the Snape child to solve the mystery. He asks them to observe, to report, to trust the adults who have finally earned that trust. Investigation belongs to Lily, Severus, and a small circle of experienced Order veterans embedded in the staff. This isn't a story about a single boy hero dragged toward destiny. This is a story about a network. Neville's quiet courage, the Snape child's hard-won honesty, Lily's brilliance, Severus's precision, all woven together. Lily is the one who notices the pattern in the water and the plumbing diagrams in an old Muggle studies text. Severus is the one who, remembering rumors of a basilisk and a girl who died 50 years ago, brews a modified mandrake draft in record time, an antidote ready before the body count rises, and their child, still shaking, still afraid of the shadow of their surname, is the one who chooses to walk back into that haunted corridor with Neville at their side, to cast the alarm charm that lures the adults to the monster's lair before it can claim another victim. We're exploring a Hogwarts where love and responsibility are shared, where the crisis is real, but the response is collective, where the battle for the school's soul is not fought by one boy alone, but by an extraordinary imperfect web of people who have decided that these children are something worth fighting for. The chamber, real or echo, closes not with a single sword stroke, but with a choice. Adults stepping forward, children stepping back without being abandoned, and that choice will echo too when the war finally comes knocking again. Teenage rebellion, falling in love, under Lily and Severus's roof. The chamber closes, the echoes fade, and life at Hogwarts does what life always tries to do after crisis. It shifts. It grows sideways, because while adults argue in staff rooms and war councils about prophecies and protections, something quieter, more dangerous, blooms under Lily and Severus's own roof. Their child falls in love. What if the real test of everything they've built isn't Voldemort's shadow, but a crush that refuses to stay harmless? In this timeline, their daughter, Irene Snape, sharp-eyed, quicker with compassion than with her wand, meets Scorpius Malfoy on the Hogwarts Express, heir to a name still whispered with unease, blonde and brittle, and trying so hard not to flinch when people say Death Eater within earshot. It is not canon's neat division of heroes and villains. It is something messier, shared study sessions in the library, a joint potions project that runs late, a moment in the astronomy tower when he admits his father still believes Muggleborn ruined everything. Irene hears the poison. She also hears the fear beneath it. Lily's reaction, when the name Malfoy finally appears in a flushed, stumbling confession over tea, is almost painfully gentle. She remembers being that age, remembers James and Severus, and the way house lines felt like destiny until she refused to let them be. This isn't a story about forbidding love. It is a story about trusting that the child you raised can walk into complicated rooms and still know who they are. She asks questions. She listens. She says very quietly, "You know I will always pick you, whatever happens." Severus does not listen, not at first. He hears Malfoy, and the years peel away. He is 16 again, standing with boys who laughed at curses, who called people like Lily less than human. We're exploring what happens when a man who once walked at the edge of darkness sees his daughter reaching toward a boy, whose family once stood exactly where he did. He projects, instantly. He sees recruitment, manipulation, a replay of his own almost irreversible mistakes. The confrontation detonates after a Hogsmeade weekend. Irene returns late, scarf smelling faintly of Malfoy Manor's expensive cologne, eyes bright with the thrill of being chosen. Severus is waiting in the sitting room, wand on the mantelpiece, voice very calm and very cold. You will not see him again. Irene laughs, disbelieving. You can't be serious. Then, when he does not move, "You married Mum. You, the boy who joined people worse than the Malfoys. And you're telling me my choices are too dangerous?" She throws their history at them like hexes. At Lily, "You chose a controversial love, and you were right. You told me that." At Severus, "You begged Dumbledore for a second chance, and he gave it to you. Why don't I get one?" Most importantly, she names the hypocrisy they have both tried not to see. "You can't demand a risk-free life from me when your entire marriage is proof that risk can become something worth fighting for." We'll examine, through this teenage rebellion, the core themes of trust and choice. Does Irene choose Scorpius because he is dangerous, because he challenges her, or because he is actually trying to unlearn everything his name means? Do Lily and Severus cling, or do they finally let go and trust the values they've poured into her since Cokeworth? The answer begins, fittingly, on a set of rusting swings. Irene writes to Scorpius and asks him to meet not in Hogsmeade, not in Diagon Alley, but in Cokeworth, by the river, where two children once argued about magic and the future. The chains creak, the metal is the same, but the story doesn't repeat exactly, it rhymes. Two teenagers, one Malfoy, one Snape, push off the ground and talk about the lives they might choose instead of inherit, and in the shadows, just far enough away not to intrude, two adults watch, hearts in their throats, realizing that the next decision may not be theirs to make at all. So when the war finally stops lurking and starts knocking on their own front door, whose definition of love, of loyalty, of danger will Irene actually carry into the fire? Voldemort's return, rewritten, no boy who lived, no elder wand, plot. The knock, when it finally comes, is not on their front door at all. It echoes through the Great Hall, through ministry corridors, through the wards around Britain themselves. The war doesn't creep this time. It arrives with ritual. So what if Voldemort's return, without a boy who lived to obsess over, is colder, more calculated, almost administrative in its horror? No Halloween in Godric's Hollow, no infant Scar, no legend to resurrect. In this timeline, the wraith that fled Godric's Hollow still exists, but it has waited, watched, learned. Instead of hitching his resurrection to Harry Potter, he chooses something more symbolic, more strategic, the child of the family that once defied him 3 times. Neville Longbottom. We're exploring a Goblet of Fire-style scheme, but twisted, a mysterious international dueling exhibition, a ministry-sponsored Unity tournament, the perfect spectacle, a bewitched artifact, not the goblet, but its cousin in purpose, drags Neville into the center of a ritual he never volunteered for. No graveyard of Little Hangleton, with Harry tied to a tombstone. Instead, imagine a forgotten battlefield from the First War, Longbottom blood on the earth, used to anchor a body that should have stayed dust. Here is where the strategic landscape fractures away from canon. Dumbledore is older, yes, but he is not alone on his mountain. He has Lily, brilliant, pragmatic, a veteran healer who knows exactly how dark curses unravel the human body. He has Severus, not a bitter, isolated spy, but a man whose entire adult life has been built on the promise that Lily would never die for a prophecy again. This isn't a story about a single headmaster quietly maneuvering children like chess pieces. This is a story about adults who remember the First War too well to let history repeat unchallenged. When rumors of strange disappearances and branded artifacts surface, the Order reforms almost overnight. Meetings in Grimmauld Place do not feel nostalgic, they feel like triage. Hogwarts, with Lily on staff and Severus entrenched as Dumbledore's most trusted operative, is not blindsided by a resurrected Dark Lord. It is braced for him, and yet, the absence of a Harry-centered prophecy changes everything. Voldemort has no single boy to hunt, no myth to disprove. He spreads his malice like a net instead of a spear. Neville, Dumbledore, the Snape family, the old pureblood houses wavering in the middle. He probes all of them, looking for the weak point. The war becomes diffuse, more like a series of surgical strikes than one long siege. Harder to predict, harder to narrate, more terrifying to live through. Inside the Snape household, the echo of the First War comes back with teeth. Severus's spy skills, the thing he hoped Irene would only hear about in heavily edited stories, are suddenly required again. Lily has to choose. Stay at Hogwarts as a shield, go undercover as a healer in compromised institutions, or step back entirely to protect their child. Which sacrifice is love and which is cowardice? The question will not leave her alone. Pattern interrupt. In canon, children stumble into the center of every major battle. But in a world where adults are more prepared and, for once, united, does the Second War finally cost fewer children? Or does Voldemort, sensing that shield closing around the young, become even more ruthless in targeting the next generation on purpose? If there is no boy who lived to break, will he decide that creating an army of orphans is the next best way to remake the world in his image, one shattered family at a time? The New Order of the Phoenix, allies, enemies, and an older Snape. So when Voldemort decides that if he cannot break a boy who lived, he will instead create an army of orphans, we arrive in a very different war room. The first meeting of the Reformed Order is not youthful rebellion in a dingy kitchen. It is a long scarred table in the rebuilt headquarters, wand burns still visible in the wood, and around it, Lily Snape, Severus at her side, James Potter across from them, Sirius half-slouched but gray at the temples, Remus lined and tired, and Neville Longbottom, a battle-hardened Auror whose parents never came home, standing guard at the door. What if we take all those schoolyard legends and crush them under 30 years of loss? They are older, they are slower. They are, paradoxically, more dangerous. James's right hand trembles when he reaches for his teacup. Severus's left eye carries a thin white scar from a curse that almost blinded him. Neville's calm is the quiet of someone who has seen canon history play out in a different configuration and still end in blood. And in the center of this charged geometry sits Lily, back straight, eyes bright, refusing to look away from any of them. Because this isn't a story about adolescent rivalry anymore. This is a story about what happens when boys who once hexed each other in corridors now have to decide whose child gets sent on the next reconnaissance mission. James and Severus have fought on the same side before. They have bled in the same mud, shielded the same civilians, stood back to back in alleys where Death Eaters apparated in like ghosts. But when James meets Severus's gaze, he still sees the boy who hung him upside down for a laugh, the boy Lily chose, the love he lost not in a blaze of glory, but in a series of painfully ordinary decisions. And Severus, for all his growth, still tastes the old bitterness. James's easy Quidditch fame, his money, his confidence, the way the world always seemed to bend toward him. Lily will not allow that to be the axis of this war. She cuts across their bickering with a quiet enough that carries more power than any shouted spell. She reminds James that his son, if he has one in this timeline, or his godson if not, is watching. She reminds Severus that their own child, their Snape child with Lily's eyes and his precise mind, will live or die based on whether these men can put away the ghosts of Hogwarts. Most importantly, she insists that the next generation not be used as currency to pay off old debts. When Sirius casually suggests that Neville lead the infiltration team because he's done it before, Lily's expression freezes. We're exploring the brutal calculus of war, but she forces them to say out loud what they are doing, choosing which young Auror is most expendable. To Neville, to the Weasley cousins, to the Snape child, shifting uncomfortably at the far end of the table. This drama is half myth, half living wound. They have grown up on fragmented stories, the Marauder's pranks, the Half-Blood Prince, the girl who might have married James but didn't. It is history they did not live, yet it shapes who is trusted with which mission, whose warnings are heeded, whose safety is quietly prioritized when plans are drawn. We'll examine one small, telling moment. When an urgent Patronus bursts through the wall, a silver raven, frantic, the room freezes. The message is short, jagged, new Death Eater cells, coordinated, moving on Hogwarts itself. Not just the castle as a symbol, but the children as targets. Silence. Then every eye turns, not to Dumbledore, he is long gone, but to Lily and Severus, co-heads of this new order, co-guardians of the school. Do they stay and fortify the ancient walls, turning classrooms into battlements again? Or do they tear children from their beds, evacuate their own child and the students they have come to love, and abandon the castle to desecration? In that suspended moment, with James's jaw clenched, Neville's hand on his wand, and their child watching, we have something more profound than tactics. We have the question that will define this war. What do you protect first? The place that made you, or the lives that might finally make something worth fighting for? Siege of Hogwarts, Take 2, when both Snapes stand their ground. James breathes out, once, like he's exhaling a lifetime of Quidditch cheers and Marauder swagger, and learning how to be a man who doesn't always get the girl. And then the decision crystallizes, not in Dumbledore's office, not in a prophecy, but here, on stone steps that have seen 1,000 schoolboy rivalries, and now host a war. What if the Battle of Hogwarts happened again, but this time with Lily and Severus not as ghosts in someone else's memory, but as the ones who stay? Outside, Death Eaters encircle the castle, dark shapes against a sky already bruised with curses, and inside we watch the school transform from sanctuary to fortress in minutes. McGonagall's voice rings through the corridors, precise and commanding, as suits of armor march and staircases lock into defensive positions. But this isn't Canon's lonely staff council. Lily is at her side, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, wand already flicking through intricate layered protections. Flitwick hovers beside them, eyes bright. Together they weave a lattice of defensive charms, shield on shield, repulsion nested inside concealment, turning every archway into a silent promise. You will not pass without paying. We're exploring a Hogwarts that has learned from its own death. Lily doesn't just raise walls, she threads healing into them, tiny runic catches that will siphon off curse residue, that will not rebound, killing magic into terrified children. When the first volley hits, the shields flare, but do not shatter. They flex, they adapt. Below, in a repurposed classroom that smells of dittany and singed parchment, Severus runs something between a potions lab and a war room. Cauldrons bubble with blood-replenishing drafts, anti-venoms, salves keyed to dark magic specifically. This is a man who cataloged curses for Voldemort and now dismantles them, bottle by bottle. He sends out vials in the pockets of older students, in the beaks of school owls, in the hands of Aurors, who never thought they'd take orders from a former Death Eater. Most importantly, he sabotages. He knows which Death Eaters favor Fiendfire, which rely on Imperius, which carry cursed blades. He brews counter-agents tailored to those signatures, quiet little betrayals that will backfire wands, deaden poisons, unravel hexes at the moment of impact. And into this orchestrated chaos step their child and Neville, not Harry, not the boy who lived by legend, but two leaders forged by classrooms and greenhouses, and the constant knowledge that prophecy might have chosen either of them. They organize student patrols, not as a child army, but as watchful pairs along corridors, each team with a signal flare, each with a route to Severus's triage and Lily's inner wards. We'll examine how leadership looks when it's shared. Their child and Neville slip through hidden passages to hunt what remains of Voldemort's Horcruxes. If they still exist in this timeline, they are fewer, more desperate, concealed in places now lit by Lily's insight and Severus's regret, a locket tied to an old family feud. A relic hidden in a classroom where Severus once bled detention ink. And the deaths? This isn't a story about reliving every canon loss, it's a story about asking what changes when love and foreknowledge stand their ground. Lily reaches Fred in time, hands blazing with green healing light as she knits torn flesh. Severus's blast-absorbing draft already in his veins. Lupin and Tonks fight back to back, saved at the last second by a shield Lily layered over the courtyard hours earlier. But others fall. A nameless 7th year who refused to leave the first years. A former Slytherin who stepped in front of a curse meant for a Muggle-born. The emotional landscape reshapes itself. Fewer famous graves, more quiet, unbearable ones. And then the final convergence. Voldemort in the Great Hall, Nagini coiled, wand raised, Neville with the sword, prophecy humming in his bones, Lily facing the man who murdered her friends, Severus facing the master he once served. Not a single boy and a wand, but a coalition, a bond of choices made and remade. The hall holds its breath as 3 wands rise, 3 paths of magic about to collide, and we stop on the instant before the final spell is cast. Killing the snake without the Elder Wand, a different end for Voldemort. 3 wands rise. Neville's grip tightens on the sword, silver catching the hellish light. Voldemort's magic coils, a serpent made of hate. And between them, Lily and Severus move in perfect, devastating tandem, 2 lives that began in Cokeworth alleyways, now standing at the very edge of history. In canon, everything pivots on a trick of ownership. Draco disarms Dumbledore, Harry disarms Draco, the Elder Wand quietly changes allegiance, and Voldemort dies because he never understood love or wand lore. But what if that chain never forges? In this world, Dumbledore does not die on the Astronomy Tower in the same way. There is no staged disarming, no secret transfer of loyalty through Malfoy's trembling hand. Harry, if he exists at all, is not the boy the prophecy marked. The Elder Wand remains a weapon, not a revelation. So the story cannot lean on a clever legal loophole in magic. It has to do something else. It has to ask, what if Voldemort falls not through a technicality, but through the full, terrible consequences of his own soul? Without the Elder Wand twist to chase, Lily and Severus focus earlier, ruthlessly, on Horcruxes. Lily in the Order's war rooms, eyes red from reading, cross-referencing every mention of soul jars and ancient curses. Severus in the shadows of Nocturne Alley, trading on his reputation, pretending to be the man he almost became, extracting rumors about rings and lockets, and a snake that is never just a snake. Together, they piece it together years before that final night. We're exploring a war that turns on preparation instead of miracle. The diary is destroyed. The ring never quite claims Dumbledore. The locket is wrenched from Grimmauld Place. The cup is stolen from under Bellatrix's nose. Each Horcrux falls, and with each one, Voldemort grows less inhuman, less invincible, more breakable, more like a man who can actually die. Which is why, when the Great Hall becomes a battlefield, the duel at its center is not a puzzle about wand allegiance. It is a straightforward, horrifying clash of magic. Neville steps forward, the almost chosen one, the boy whose parents were broken instead of killed. You missed, he says, voice shaking but clear. You tried to erase us. You failed. Pattern interrupt. Voldemort laughs. Not the high, cold laugh we expect, but something ragged, almost human, as the last shards of his soul strain to hold themselves together. Then, Nagini strikes, and meets Lily's shield. Her magic flares green-white, not the sickly green of death, but the fierce color of life dug in, refusing to move. Behind her, students huddle. She is a wall between them and oblivion. This isn't a story about a mother dying in a nursery. This is a story about a mother choosing, again, to stand between children and a killer, and this time, surviving the moment. Severus sees it, not just Lily, but the way Voldemort's curse stutters, the way the air around him flickers every time he draws on magic that no longer has Horcruxes to anchor it. Only a dark arts scholar would notice the instability in the spell matrices, the tiny fractures where too many splintered soul pieces once sat. He changes his casting angle by a hair's breadth, shifts the timing of his counter curse, forcing Voldemort to overreach. Neville moves as they planned. While Voldemort's attention snaps to the man who betrayed him twice, the sword arcs. It is not prophecy that guides it, but discipline, grief, and a lifetime of being underestimated. Nagini falls, and with her, the last safeguard on Voldemort's fragmented soul. The final spells collide. Lily's shield, Severus's cutting, Voldemort's killing curse. No Elder Wand contradiction, no rebound because of hidden allegiance, just a body that can no longer contain the strain of its own corruption. His magic folds inward, devouring what's left of him. When the light clears, there is no grand corpse, no theatrical pose. Only ash, and a silence so deep, it feels like the castle itself is exhaling. Most importantly, he is not defeated by a single destined child. He is brought down by a network of lives he tried to script and own, the Marauders who defied him, the Slytherin who walked away, the Muggleborn he underestimated, the children of those he tortured, all standing together in one extraordinary fragile alliance. For Lily and Severus, the victory is almost too big to hold. They walk out of the war alive, but also back to the beginning, to Cokeworth, to a boy on a playground and a girl on a swing. The circle closes. The choice Lily made, the risk she took in loving Severus through his worst self, becomes one of the pillars of the world that rises from Hogwarts' ruins. This is something more profound than survival. It's something worth fighting for. A future where their marriage is not a scandal or a mistake, but a living argument that people can change, that love can redirect even the darkest paths. And yet, as the dust settles and the banners come down, there is one question left hanging over this new peace, a question about the prophecy that never quite came true, and the children who will grow up in the shadow of a war that ended differently than anyone expected. Aftermath and accountability, Snape without the martyrdom. So what happens when the war ends, Voldemort falls, and Severus Snape is still alive to hear what the world thinks of him? In canon, his story closes with a tragic tableau on the floor of the Shrieking Shack, his memories poured into Harry's hands, his redemption revealed when he can no longer defend or complicate it. Here, we're exploring something more uncomfortable and, in its own way, more extraordinary. What if the debates that raged in our world about Snape's morality now rage inside the Great Hall, while the man himself sits there, spine rigid, listening to people argue whether he's a hero, a bully, or something in between? This isn't a story about easy absolution. It's a story about a living reckoning. The Wizengamot convenes war crimes inquiries. Names are read, known Death Eaters, suspected collaborators, spies. Severus's is on every list. Yes, Dumbledore's old letters testify that he was a double agent. Yes, Lily Snape, war healer and order member, stands in those echoing chambers and says, clearly, that her husband risked his life, again and again, to bring Voldemort down. But then former students are called. A Hufflepuff talks about being humiliated to tears over a melted cauldron. A Slytherin quietly admits that Snape's detentions kept them away from recruitment meetings. A Gryffindor remembers him stepping between them and a Death Eater's curse. Which version is true? We'll examine the legal and social cost of living in that contradiction. Maybe the court stops short of Azkaban, acknowledging his spy work and Lily's testimony, but imposes sanctions, monitoring charms, a formal censure, a limit on certain positions of authority. Maybe there are parents who petition Hogwarts, demanding that the man who once terrorized their children never teach again. And yet there are others, war orphans, Muggleborns he shielded in those last terrible months, who write letters saying they owe him their lives. The wizarding world doesn't get a neat narrative, neither does he. Inside, Severus is left with something far heavier than a noble death. Without the easy canon ending of dying for Lily's son, he has to wake up every morning and remember that he chose dark arts as a teenager, that he spoke the word mudblood, that he made children feel small and afraid. He also has to remember that he fed Dumbledore critical information, sabotaged curses, and stood in front of killing curses meant for people he once despised. How do you live with both truths at once? How do you build a life when you can't hide behind martyrdom? Most importantly, how does his child see him now? They watched him duel in the last battle, cloak flaring, wand a whip of light. They've heard Marauder-era stories from Sirius and Remus, stories of a bitter boy steeped in dark magic. They've heard their mother's gentler, more painful memories, the boy on the swings in Cokeworth, the boy who loved her and lost himself. Maybe they remember, with a wince, the day he snapped at them in class, the cutting remark that felt less like discipline and more like a curse. Do they forgive him? Do they challenge him? Do they, one night in the kitchen, ask, "Did you ever regret choosing them over us, even for a moment?" Years later, the legend of Snape has begun to fade, not into sainthood, but into something more human. We see him in a classroom that feels brighter than the dungeon he once haunted, even if the jars and fumes are the same. He is still sharp, still demanding, but the cruelty has been sanded down into precision, into a fierce belief that his students can actually do better. He corrects a shy Ravenclaw's potion, not with a sneer, but with a murmured, "again," and the faintest nod when they succeed. Lily appears at the door with a tray of tea, her presence an easy counterpoint to his severity. Their child, perhaps now an assistant, perhaps just visiting, leans against a desk, watching. In that quiet, we understand. This isn't a story about a perfect man redeemed by death. This is a story about a flawed man who lived long enough to be accountable, to be argued over, to be loved, and slowly to change. And as the camera lingers on that classroom door, still open, we're left wondering what the next generation will make of the name Snape. Weapon, warning, or something worth fighting for. Lily's legacy, from Harry's mother to architect of a different future. But if Snape's name becomes a debate, Lily's becomes something else entirely. In canon, she is almost always spoken of in relation to someone else. Harry's mother, James's wife, Snape's lost love. A flower pressed between the pages of 3 different men's stories. What if, in this timeline, she is allowed to remain alive long enough to write her own? This isn't a story about a saint who dies beautifully and then disappears into backstory. This is a story about a witch who survives a war, looks at the broken world around her, and decides survival isn't enough. We're exploring a Lily who does not stop at sacrificial love in a cottage. She moves into boardrooms, classrooms, and courtrooms, and refuses to let the old pure blood order simply rebrand itself and carry on. So what does that actually look like? Imagine post-war Hogwarts under Headmaster Dumbledore, but with Professor Lily Snape leading a new Muggle-born advocacy office, turning her own childhood in Cokeworth into policy. She drafts charters that guarantee Muggle-born access to legal counsel when they're first approached by the Ministry. She pushes for trauma-informed education, smaller class sizes for those who lived through raids, healing circles in the hospital wing, professors trained to recognize curse-related panic rather than punishing disruption. When the board balks, she points quietly to the dark mark scars on former students' arms and asks, "Do you really think detentions were enough?" Most importantly, she refuses to let the children of Death Eaters become the next generation's monsters. In this world, it is Lily who designs rehabilitation programs, pairing those children with mentors, apprenticeships, and intensive counseling instead of Azkaban by inheritance. Draco does not simply drift from arrogance to guilt. He sits across from Lily, week after week, as she forces him to examine what he believed, what he saw, what he can choose now. That is something more profound than forgiveness. It is structured, relentless hope. And while she does all this, Lily herself evolves. We remember the fiery Gryffindor, who hexed bullies on the Hogwarts Express, the teenager who walked away from Severus when he chose dark arts over her. Here, she also becomes a strategist in the Order, then a professor, then a mother who knows that love and boundaries must live together, or not at all. She learns to compromise on method without compromising on principle. She can sit in the same staff room as James, Sirius, and Severus, hold the history of all three men in her chest, and yet not be defined by any of them. They are part of her story. They are not the title. How do younger witches see that? Not as a flawless martyr, but as a complex, sometimes controversial role model. The girl who married the former almost Death Eater and made it work. The professor who pushed them too hard, then apologized when she misjudged. The activist who made enemies in the Wiesengemot and still walked back in the next week. Her legacy is argued over in dormitories and Diagon Alley cafes, not carved in untouchable marble. And when we loop back to our original what if, the picture sharpens. By letting Lily marry Severus and live, we do not just save Snape from tragedy, we restore Lily's agency as the architect of a different future. Her love does not simply motivate men to act after she is gone. Her choices, sustained over years, actively rewrite laws, institutions, and lives. In this version of the wizarding world, the most extraordinary magic is not the curse that killed her, but the life she insists on living instead. And that life, as we'll examine next, reshapes even the prophecy that once seemed to control everything. James Potter, rewritten, rival, ally, or something in between. And that life, as we'll examine next, reshapes not only the prophecy, but the man who once thought it had chosen him for greatness. Because in this world, James Potter lives. And survival, without Lily as his wife, becomes its own complicated curse. What if James's great romance is not a marriage, but a haunting? In this timeline, Lily is always the girl he loved and lost to someone else, the brilliant redhead who chose the boy from Spinner's End over the Quidditch star from Godric's Hollow. Maybe he marries a fellow Auror who understands the way he throws himself into danger. Maybe he never marries at all, drifting through brief connections that never quite dissolve the question, why wasn't I the one? This isn't a story about James as a one-note rival. It's a story about what happens when the golden boy has to grow up without getting the girl, yet still has to stand beside her in battle, in meetings, in the quiet aftermath of war. We're exploring a James who walks into Order gatherings and sees Lily and Severus sitting together, trading quiet looks over strategy maps, and has to decide every single time whether he will be less or more than the worst version of himself. Post-war, their relationship could have frozen into polite distance, but it doesn't, not if they all live this long. We can imagine evenings at a crowded kitchen table, Lily pouring tea, Severus making acerbic comments about ministry incompetence, and James firing back with barbed jokes that are not quite cruel anymore. The barbs still land, but now they land on shared history, on the memory of raids survived together, of duels fought back to back, of Lily standing between them and refusing to let either die stupidly. Does James have children in this world? If he does, their lives are woven into this new tapestry. Picture a Potter son or daughter at Hogwarts, eyeing the Snape child across the common room, aware of a rivalry that began long before either of them was born. They might compete for the same Quidditch position, the same academic prize, the same spot in a renewed Dumbledore's army, while Neville Longbottom, now the prophecy child, stands between them as a quiet, grounding center. Or, if James never has children, that protective instinct has to go somewhere. Maybe it drives him to mentor new Aurors, to stand in the doorway of the training room and bark corrections that are secretly acts of love. Maybe it leads him back to Hogwarts as a defense professor, where he watches over a generation that will never know how close they came to being names on a monument. Most importantly, losing Lily, but surviving the wars, forces James to interrogate the story he once told about himself. He cannot hide behind Quidditch trophies when the woman he loved remembers the boy who hexed her friend for fun. He cannot pretend he was always the hero when the actual record includes cruelty, entitlement, and an ugly word he never said, but certainly laughed at. In this timeline, he has to live long enough to apologize, not theatrically, but repeatedly, in the small daily choices that show he is no longer that boy. And that is something more profound than any canon redemption arc. A James who is brave in battle, flawed in love, and still learning how to be decent in the quiet moments afterward. No one in this what if gets everything they want, but more of them get time. Time to become complicated, to change, to exist as more than tragic backstory pinned to Harry's scar. The question is, when that extra time collides with the prophecy itself, whose life does it save, and whose story does it rewrite next? Dumbledore and the lost narrative of the Chosen One, and whose story does it rewrite next? To answer that, we have to walk into the office of the man who, in canon, never met a child he couldn't quietly turn into a strategy. What if the prophecy still whispers about a boy born as the 7th month dies, but Dumbledore refuses to hang the entire war on one small, terrified pair of shoulders? In this timeline, Neville still matters. The words of Sybil Trelawney still matter, but he is never alone with that weight. From the moment the prophecy is shared, Lily and Severus are in the room, not as broken supplicants, but as long-term allies who expect to be consulted, not managed. We'll examine how radically that shifts Dumbledore's instincts. In canon, he always circles back to the same pattern. Isolate Harry, conceal the full truth, and then ask the impossible. Here, the pattern cracks. Because how do you justify sending a child into mortal danger when his mother is across the table, wand on her teacup, voice very calm as she says, "Explain exactly why you need my son to do this instead of you?" How do you talk about the greater good when Severus, no longer hollowed out by grief, can coldly offer 3 better plans on the spot? Dumbledore's relationship with Severus becomes something else entirely. This isn't a story about a headmaster exploiting a man's lifelong guilt over Lily's death. This is a story about 2 brilliant strategists who don't like each other much, but respect each other enough to argue in private and present a united front in public. The bond between them is not penance, it is pragmatism. Severus still spies, he still risks his life. But when Dumbledore withholds, Severus can actually say, "No, you will tell me what you intend, or you will find another agent." And Dumbledore, lacking the leverage of endless remorse, has to listen. Most importantly, the endgame can't be built around child martyrdom. There is no Elder Wand gambit that requires a boy to walk unarmed into a forest. There is no secret plan that demands Neville die so that everyone else may live. Instead, we're exploring a Dumbledore who, pressed on all sides by adults he cannot easily sentimentalize, is forced into something more transparent, more collective. War councils that include Lily's precise mind, Severus's ruthless logic, Augusta Longbottom's iron spine, plans that assume children will fight, yes, but only with layers of adult protection. And Lily? She is the constant interruption to his mythology. After every battle, she demands healers, counselors, real mental health support in the hospital wing, refusing to let trauma become a teaching tool. She will not let Neville or her own child be paraded as symbols before they have processed what they've survived. When Dumbledore speaks of hope, she quietly asks whose nightmares are paying for it. The pattern breaks here. This isn't a story about a single chosen one. It's about dismantling the belief that salvation must come from one suffering child and discovering something more profound, an entire community choosing together to fight. But if no one is the chosen one, then who exactly does Voldemort fear most when the final battle comes? Slytherin House, Redeemed, the Snape family, and house politics. In that world, when Voldemort looks toward Hogwarts and wonders who might actually undo him, his gaze doesn't fix on a single boy. It drifts instead toward a house everyone has already condemned, and toward the couple quietly rewriting what that house means. Because what if, in the years after the Second War, the most feared common room in Britain is still Slytherin, but its emblematic figure isn't Lucius Malfoy or Bellatrix Lestrange, it's Severus Snape, the man who defected twice, the head of house whose name is on both sides of the casualty lists, the professor who lived and did not retreat into bitterness. Slytherin is still whispered about in corridors, still side-eyed at Quidditch matches, still bearing the canon stain of Death Eaters and dark marks. But now its leader stands at the staff table with a war record that doesn't fit the stereotype. Spy, traitor, savior, survivor, and beside him, sometimes literally, is Lily. Lily Snape, Muggle-born, war heroine, the woman who chose a Slytherin and never apologized for it. Her presence at Hogwarts is a quiet revolution. When she walks into the Great Hall, students see a living contradiction. The girl the old blood purists would have spat on, holding hands with the man they once wanted as their prize. This isn't a story about whitewashing ambition or pretending cunning was never used for cruelty. This is a story about refusing the lazy equation that Slytherin equals evil and letting love complicate the narrative. We'll examine how, together, they make that complication tangible. Lily pushes for cross-house study groups, pairing Slytherin strategists with Ravenclaw theorists, Hufflepuff steady hands, and, crucially, Muggle-born Gryffindors, who might once have flinched at green and silver. Severus, who knows exactly how ideology spreads in whispers, draws a hard, public line. Blood purity rhetoric earns detentions, lost points, and, if necessary, removal from the Quidditch team. In his office, behind closed doors, he does something even more radical. He tells a trembling fourth year whose parents serve Azkaban sentences that wanting a different life is not betrayal, but survival. Lily builds mentorship circles that pair younger Slytherins with older Muggleborns from other houses, creating bonds that cross the very lines Voldemort exploited. They're not perfect. There are relapses, slurs muttered under breath, owls from furious parents, but each time the response is the same, firm, consistent, and most importantly, united between them. And then there is their child. Whether the Sorting Hat sends that child to Slytherin, or they simply grow up half in that common room, by virtue of Severus's role, the Snape heir becomes a living bridge. Imagine a Snape student sitting between Draco Malfoy's cousin and a Muggle-born roommate, passing potions notes one way and Muggle music the other. Imagine them rolling their eyes when someone calls Slytherin irredeemable, then quietly correcting a friend who parrots their grandfather's bloodline pride. They are proof that ambition can mean healing, that cunning can mean knowing how to navigate out of an abusive legacy. We're exploring something more profound here than a redeemed professor or a softened house. By letting Lily love a Slytherin and survive, we give the series a chance to heal one of its deepest divides, not by erasing Slytherin's past, but by letting it grow into something new, something worth fighting for. But if Slytherin changes from within, what happens to those outside the castle walls, the old allies, the former enemies, who built their identities on the certainty that snakes never change their skin? Micro-canon, tiny moments that would hit completely differently. So what happens inside the castle once the banners are the same, but the people beneath them are not? What if the real revolution isn't in the Great Hall speeches, but in the tiny, flickering moments almost no one sees? Picture Christmas at Hogwarts. In canon, Harry stands alone before the mirror of Erised, staring at parents he can never touch, drowning in a love he was denied. Here, it's a Snape child who slips through the quiet corridors, following a trail of candlelight and half-heard whispers, until that same silvered glass looms out of the dark. They brace for tragedy, for war, for the scars and headlines that have already shaped their life, and instead, the mirror shows a family at the breakfast table, Severus laughing without tension in his shoulders, Lily alive and unhaunted, no dark mark, no whispers of Death Eater, or traitor, or chosen one. Just three people, together, in ordinary, extraordinary peace. The ache is still there, but it's an ache of longing for a future, not a grief for something already stolen. In Potions, the change is quieter, but maybe even more profound. Canon gives us Neville, trembling under Snape's glare, the classroom a stage for humiliation that echoes his parents' torture. In this world, Severus still snaps when Neville melts a cauldron, instinctive and sharp, the old habits of control and contempt. But before the boy can flinch back into himself, Lily's voice cuts across the room, not scolding Severus, not undermining him, simply stepping in, a hand on Neville's wrist, a soft correction, a quick charm to fix the potion. She turns the disaster into a lesson, the fear into a moment of connection, and Severus, forced to watch his wife choose gentleness where he chose cruelty, adjusts, not instantly, not magically, but lesson by lesson, detention by detention. The child of war heroes and the former Death Eater find something like truce. This isn't a story about perfect redemption, it's a story about generational damage being answered with something more patient than rage. On the Quidditch stands, the contrast with canon almost hurts. We remember solitary Snape, cloak snapping, eyes narrowed, always apart. Now we're exploring a different image. Lily in Gryffindor colors, Severus in Slytherin green, their cheers colliding as their child streaks past on a broom. They argue calls, they banter about tactics. They both rise to their feet at the same breathtaking dive. House lines still exist. Pride still runs hot. But the camera, if we had one, keeps finding their hands meeting in the middle, fingers laced, the old house war literally bridged by touch. And then there's the staff room. Late, when the fire has burned low, McGonagall with her tartan slippers, Flitwick perched on an armchair, Lily curled into the corner of a sofa, Severus half in shadow beside her. They talk about the First War, not as legend, not as canon exposition, but as memory. James's laugh, Marlene's stubbornness, the Longbottoms before St. Mungo's. There is grief, yes, and there are names that still make the room fall silent, but there is also laughter, and the kind of teasing that says, we survived together. Most importantly, Severus is inside the circle this time, not hovering at its edge. These are micro scenes. They don't rewrite prophecies or battles on their own, yet this is a story about how love, quiet and persistent, reshapes the texture of a life, a mirror that shows hope instead of ghosts. A classroom that teaches courage instead of fear. A Quidditch stand where rivalry and affection coexist. A staff room where former enemies share tea, not just tactics. When we let Lily marry Severus, we don't just change who lives or dies. We change who gets to feel safe in the in-between moments, the Tuesday afternoons and the late-night detentions. And if that's true, then we have to ask, how far do those small mercies ripple outward when the next war finally comes knocking on Hogwarts doors again? Cost of the change. Who loses what? When Lily marries Severus, but mercy always has a price. When the next war comes knocking on Hogwarts doors, we have to ask, who pays for Lily choosing Severus, and who never even gets the chance to be? On the surface, the gains look extraordinary. Lily lives. The green flash in Godric's Hollow never happens, or happens somewhere else. Severus is not condemned to decades of unrequited grief, clinging to a silver doe and a single word, always. Like a lifeline. If they have a child, that boy or girl grows up with two parents who actually love each other, who fight and reconcile, and sit together at kitchen tables instead of becoming ghosts in a nursery. Slytherin House, with Lily's presence at Severus's side, finally has a living argument that ambition and compassion can exist together, not just in Dumbledore's speeches, but in the staff room, in detentions, in who gets a second chance. But what if those gains are only one side of the ledger, because the cost is brutal? Harry Potter as we know him, scarred, stubborn, forged by a cupboard and a prophecy, may never be born at all, or he might be born Harry Snape, or Harry Evans, a child whose greatest trauma is not starvation under the Dursleys, but the weight of being the son of a controversial couple. No boy who lived, no lightning bolt, no canon trio sneaking through trapdoors and facing trolls together. James loses the love of his life before he ever truly has her. Sirius loses the brotherhood that would have been built around that marriage. Remus loses the one household that, in canon, finally welcomes him without condition. The precise alchemy of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the way courage, insecurity, and brilliance collide into something more profound, never crystallizes in quite the same way. Ron may still be there, but not as the same best friend to the same boy, not with the same history of shared near-death and late-night chess games. And war's cost does not vanish. It redistributes. If Voldemort never targets the Potters, he may turn more fully toward the Longbottoms. Alice and Frank might become the central threat to his rise, the parents he personally tries to break. Maybe Neville is the one marked as his equal, and this time there is no Lily Potter standing between a baby and the killing curse. Or perhaps Voldemort survives his first fall entirely, which means different names on the memorial wall at Hogwarts, different bodies on the floor of the Department of Mysteries. Most importantly, Lily herself does not escape tragedy. She trades one kind for another. She chooses a life of constant tension, of order meetings where people fall silent when she walks in with her Slytherin husband, of articles in the Prophet questioning her judgment for marrying a man who once stood on the edge of Death Eater circles. She lives in the in-between, mediating every argument between Severus and James, between Severus and Sirius, between Severus and the world. This isn't a story about love magically fixing a broken man. This is a story about how loving him becomes work and sacrifice and something worth fighting for every single day. We're exploring a what if, not building a wish fulfillment machine. Every tender evening in Spinner's End has a shadow somewhere else. So the real question isn't just what changes when Lily marries Severus. It's who, in this new world, has to bleed so that she gets to live, and the answer to that might take us somewhere far darker than Godric's Hollow ever was. Why this what if feels so intense? Snape, fandom, and projection. So why does this particular what if feel like touching a live wire? Why does the phrase Lily Snape make some fans soft with longing and others recoil like they've just swallowed a skiving snack box the wrong way around? Part of it is Severus himself. In canon, he occupies this razor's edge between tragic anti-hero and outright abuser. To some, he's the boy from Cokeworth who never stopped loving the girl on the swing. To others, he's the man who terrorizes children, bullies Neville, and brutalizes Harry in a classroom that should have been safe. The idea of rewarding him with Lily doesn't just feel like changing a ship. It feels like we're relitigating questions about redemption, entitlement, and whether lifelong suffering cancels out lifelong cruelty. When we imagine Lily staying, forgiving, marrying him, we're not only rewriting her choice, we're answering a deeper question. Does love erase consequences? This isn't a story about scoring points in a moral debate. This is a story about where we, as readers, instinctively place the line between sympathy and accountability, and then there is the projection. Severus embodies a fantasy many of us recognize and rarely admit, the belief that being loved by the right person can finally fix you, that the lonely, angry child, the teenager dabbling in dark arts, the bitter adult at the dungeon desk could have become extraordinary if only someone had stayed. At the same time, he embodies the opposite fear, that some people will always choose resentment over growth, no matter who reaches for them. Lily Snape as a pairing forces us into a corner. Which version do we believe? The man saved by her hand on his shoulder, or the man who would still call her mudblood when cornered? Lily herself becomes a mirror. For some, she's a flawless saint, perfect mother, perfect friend, always right. For others, she's a brilliant, impulsive, sometimes harsh 17-year-old who can slam a door and mean it. Letting her choose Severus instead of James challenges our quiet assumptions about what good girls should want. Is safety with James the only correct answer? Or could a good, principled witch realistically be drawn to the boy who showed her magic in the park and wrote her letters from Spinner's End, even when his world grew darker than hers? This is where alternate romances like this one become so compelling. We're exploring emotional fault lines already present in canon, not replacing canon with wish fulfillment. What if early love really can survive ideology, war, and betrayal? What if it can't? Each version of Lily and Severus together becomes a test case for forgiveness, growth, and the limits of I'm sorry. Most importantly, it lets us ask whether some bonds are something worth fighting for, or whether walking away is the braver choice. Here's the pattern interrupt, pause, and check your own pulse. Does Lily Snape make you hopeful, angry, intrigued, exhausted? That reaction is data. It reveals what you actually believe about love, responsibility, and who deserves a second chance. And those beliefs will shape what you think should happen next, when this marriage meets prophecy, war, and a Dark Lord who does not care about childhood promises. Comparing timelines. Canon versus Lily Snape, beat by beat. So let's line them up, side by side, and see what actually changes when Lily Evans becomes Lily Snape. In canon, Cokeworth is a prologue, 2 children on a swing set, a fragile bond that will be broken. In the Lily Severus timeline, Cokeworth is the foundation. We're exploring a world where the girl who loves fiercely and the boy who studies obsessively learn, early, to fight their parents' bitterness together. The fights on the towpath still happen, the tension over dark arts still crackles, but the apology comes sooner, the word mudblood never lands, and the friendship doesn't just survive 5th year, it deepens. Canon gives us the 5th year rupture as the axis on which everything turns. Insult, humiliation, James's cruelty, Lily's disgust, and then distance. What if, instead, that moment becomes a crucible? In the Lily Snape line, Severus still flirts with darkness, but Lily calls him on it, hard, in private, and he chooses her over the boys in skull masks. The war doesn't steal him first, love does. This isn't a story about a single redemptive tear on a tower. This is a story about hundreds of small, stubborn choices not to walk away. Watch how the war alignment shifts. In canon, Snape joins the Death Eaters, overhears the prophecy, and spends the rest of his life trying to atone for handing Lily's death to Voldemort. His courage is backloaded, guilt-driven, almost suicidal. In the alternate, he never takes the mark. He and Lily enter the Order of the Phoenix as a pair, her brilliance in charms and protective magic, his encyclopedic knowledge of curses and potions. He still spies, but now as a husband who comes home from Dumbledore's office to debrief with the one person he trusts completely. completely. His heroism is less spectacular and more exhausting. Years of sustained, difficult goodness instead of one desperate pivot. Canon Lily's narrative collapses into one night in Godric's Hollow. She is the mother who dies in a flash of green, her love distilled into a single sacrificial act. In the Lily Snape timeline, she lives long enough to argue with the Wizengamot about werewolf employment, to redesign Hogwarts' defensive curriculum, to raise a child, or children, who see their parents fight and forgive and keep choosing each other. Her love isn't a statue in a graveyard, it's a daily practice. And notice how the center of gravity moves. Canon is a child-centric epic. Harry as Chosen One, adults as orbiting planets of guidance or betrayal. Here, the prophecy may fall on Neville, or fracture entirely if Voldemort never hears it at all. The narrative becomes multi-generational, adults and children sharing the burden, trading victories and mistakes. Destiny loosens, accumulated choices tighten. Most importantly, changing who Lily marries doesn't just swap a romance subplot, it reorients the moral architecture of the series. Canon orbits martyrdom, Lily's death, Dumbledore's sacrifice, Snape's fatal penance. The Lily Severus line orbits partnership, two people learning how to stand in the dark together, how to build something worth fighting for before the Dark Lord ever knocks. So what happens, beat by beat, when that partnership finally collides with prophecy, Horcruxes, and a Dark Lord who expects everyone to stand alone? Would Snape still be Snape if Lily loved him back? So what happens when that partnership collides with prophecy and war? Before we trace every Horcrux and every battlefield, we have to ask a harder question. If Lily actually chose Severus and stayed, would he still be Snape? Because what if love doesn't work the way fairy tales promise? In canon, it's tempting to imagine that if Lily had just loved him back, all the bitterness would melt, the cruelty would vanish, and the frightened boy from Cokeworth would finally feel safe. But this isn't a story about love as a magic spell that erases the past. Severus still grows up in a house full of shouting and slammed doors. He still learns, very young, that power keeps you from being hurt, and that if you cut first with words, no one sees you bleed. So even with Lily beside him, he walks into adulthood with the same scars. The difference is that now, when that sharp tongue lashes out, there is someone in the room who refuses to pretend it's harmless. Picture a late night in their tiny kitchen after a miserable day at Hogwarts. Severus railing about dunderheads and incompetence, about Gryffindor arrogance that always looks like James. Lily lets him vent, listens until the venom starts looping back on itself, and then quietly says his name. Just his name. A line in the sand. You don't get to become what hurt you. We're exploring a version of Snape who is still sarcastic, still plays favorites, still holds grudges like they are heirlooms. He will absolutely humiliate a careless student who reminds him of his father, or of Sirius, or of every boy who laughed while he hung upside down by the lake. But he will also come home to someone who asks, was that actually about them, or about you? Love doesn't erase the darkness. It redirects it, forces it to negotiate with another will, another moral center that will not let him sink entirely into self-pity or sadism. Canon gives us the Snape who looks at Harry's face and sees Lily's eyes framed in James's features, a living, breathing wound that never closes. In this timeline, there may be no Harry Potter as we know him, no daily reminder of his worst failure walking into his classroom at 11. Without that constant trigger, some edges soften. Maybe he is a little less vicious to Neville, a little less obsessed with humiliating every Gryffindor who dares to be brave in public. But old habits die hard, and the Slytherins still know that Professor Snape will protect them first. There is another danger here, quieter, but just as real. What if Lily, out of loyalty, starts smoothing over his worst moments? He didn't mean it. You don't know what he's been through. If she becomes the translator who always explains him to the world, she might accidentally enable the very cruelty she's trying to heal. This is a story about a marriage that only works if Lily keeps her spine as well as her heart. If Severus learns that being loved is not the same as being excused. So would he still be Snape? Yes. Sharp, difficult, morally gray, still capable of extraordinary pettiness and extraordinary courage. But now he has more opportunities to choose better, and more reasons to try, because someone he loves is watching, holding him accountable, refusing to let him hide behind tragedy as destiny. The question is, when that Snape, the one with something more profound to lose, stands at the crossroads of prophecy, which side of the line does he finally step to, and who pays the price if he hesitates? Romance as resistance, what Lily and Severus's love symbolizes. So when he hesitates at that crossroads, it's not just fear of death or devotion to Lily that's in play, it's the weight of what their love has come to mean in a world built on hierarchies. Because if Lily Evans actually marries Severus Snape, that marriage is not only intimate and fragile and private, it is political. What if we look at Lily's choice not as a soft-focus romance, but as an act of refusal? A Muggle-born Gryffindor, brilliant and beloved, choosing a working-class, half-blood Slytherin, who once flirted with dark arts cuts across almost every line the wizarding world draws. Blood, house, class, ideology. This isn't a story about a good girl redeeming a bad boy. This is a story about a woman seeing the whole, complicated person in front of her and saying, "I will stand with you, even if it costs me." In canon, Lily's death becomes a symbol against blood purity. In this timeline, her life with Severus does that work every single day. Their household is a living argument that magical worth is not tied to ancestry, a Muggle-born wife, a half-blood husband, maybe a child whose very existence makes pure-blood genealogists grind their teeth. Every time Severus walks away from his old Death Eater circle and comes home to Lily, he becomes proof that people can step back from the edge and still be loved. Most importantly, he becomes proof that repentance is not theoretical. It makes tea, it changes nappies, it repairs the roof on Spinner's End, and under all of that there is class. We're exploring a version of Lily who looks at James Potter's easy wealth, his warm manor house, his family name, and still turns toward the boy from the damp Cokeworth street. Severus' poverty and abusive home are often background noise in canon. Here, they are part of the emotional stakes. Lily doesn't just marry a man, she marries his history. She refuses the comfortable, privileged path she could have had with James and ties her life to someone who has never been safe. That choice is a rejection of respectability politics in wizard robes. Then there's the house divide. Gryffindor and Slytherin romances are almost mythological in the series, whispered about more than seen. Their marriage would be the exception that students point to in the Great Hall when the Sorting Hat splits friends apart, when courage meets cunning, when Muggle-born meets half-blood, when red and green actually sit together at the same kitchen table. Something more profound than school rivalry is being rewritten. Here's the pattern interrupt. This isn't a story about whether they're right for each other in some abstract soulmate sense. It's about what happens when someone chooses the harder, less socially approved love, and refuses to apologize for it. That choice raises the emotional stakes of every later decision. If Severus betrays the Order now, he's not just betraying a cause. He's betraying the life Lily risked her reputation to build with him. And if the war comes crashing through their front door, the question isn't only who survives. It's whether that fragile, defiant vision of being together can survive a world that was never built to allow it. Because once love becomes resistance, every spell, every secret, every sacrifice has to answer the same question. Was this bond something worth fighting for, or not? Fanfic futures. How this timeline could spawn 100 stories. So where does that leave us, once the last curse has been cast, and the last vow has been made? It leaves us standing at the edge of something wide open, a world where Lily Evans actually became Lily Snape, and the story doesn't end with survival, it begins with what comes after, because what if the most compelling chapters are the ones we haven't outlined yet? Imagine a whole cycle of stories centered on their child. Maybe they become a healer, obsessed with reversing curse damage, because they grew up watching their parents' scars, visible and invisible. Maybe they reject potions entirely and chase dragons in Romania, desperate to build a life where no one whispers Snape and Evans like a legend. Or maybe they leave Britain altogether, vanishing into some quiet village in Canada or Japan, raising their own children under Muggle street lamps, trying to prove that love can exist without a prophecy breathing down its neck. Parallel to that, there's a Neville Longbottom who never quite believes he deserves the title the world hands him. This isn't a story about the boy who lived being effortlessly brave. This is a story about the boy who lives standing in a dueling classroom, wand shaking, while Lily corrects his stance with infinite patience, and Severus tears apart his technique with ruthless precision, and then quietly hands him an extra shield charm to practice. We're exploring a Neville series where every victory feels like an accident, Every compliment feels unearned, and yet, task by task, lesson by lesson, he grows into the professor who teaches defense, or the Auror who dismantles the last Death Eater cells, because two deeply flawed adults refuse to let him give up on himself. And what about James? What if there's a quiet, devastating novella that lives entirely inside his head? We'll examine the man who lost the girl, who raised a son who is not the chosen one, who watches from the stands as Neville faces a dragon while Lily and Severus sit together in the staff box. Years of bitterness, then years of uneasy civility, then a single absurd moment, maybe a joint detention patrol gone wrong, where he and Severus fight back to back and realize they are, horrifyingly, on the same side. From there, an older James, mentoring young pranksters in a post-war Hogwarts, teaching them where the line is, because he remembers crossing it, because he remembers Severus bleeding on the grass, and Lily walking away. But every tender branch has a darker twin. What if the war corrodes their marriage until love and resentment are indistinguishable? What if their child, suffocated by the weight of two legends, walks straight into the arms of the very darkness they fought? What if Voldemort, enraged by the symbolism of a Muggle-born witch and a half-blood from Spinner's End united against him, targets them with a fury that makes Godric's Hollow look merciful? Most importantly, this timeline isn't a cage, it's a playground. Every moment we've traced, a choice at the lake, a conversation in Dumbledore's office, a kiss in a shadowed kitchen, can be a branching point where you ask, if this changed, then what? Follow the emotional logic, break it, heal it, because once we accept that this bond was something worth fighting for, the extraordinary question that remains is simple. What story do you tell inside it? Bringing it home, what this what if teaches us about canon. Because once we accept that this bond was something worth fighting for, the extraordinary question that remains is simple. What story do you tell inside it? And here's where bringing it back to canon actually makes everything sharper, not softer. When we walk Lily and Severus forward together, hand in hand instead of breaking apart by the lake, we suddenly see how much of the original saga hangs on that single word he spits at her. Mudblood. One slur, one moment of cowardice, and the entire future tilts. Follow the line. If that insult is swallowed instead of spoken, if apology comes fast enough and real enough that she stays, then the prophecy doesn't automatically mean Harry Potter. Neville could be the child marked as Voldemort's equal, or no child is marked at all because a different Severus never runs to Voldemort with half-heard words in a dingy pub. We feel, almost physically, how contingent Harry's very existence is, how the boy who lived is not destiny carved in stone, but the byproduct of Lily's largely off-page choices, who she forgives, who she marries, who she trusts. This isn't a story about proving that Lily should have chosen Snape. This is a story about seeing love in this world as more than a single night in Godric's Hollow and a single green flash. Canon gives us love as sacrifice, as a mother's body between her baby and death, as a man's life spent in penance for the woman he lost. It is fierce and tragic and beautiful. But what if love in this universe could also be long-term, negotiated, sometimes messy, Lily arguing with Severus about dark arts at the kitchen table, Severus leaving a meeting with aspiring Death Eaters because he finally believes her when she says, "You're better than this." That quieter, ongoing love could still be world-changing. Most importantly, following this path exposes how much of the series is about choice rather than fate. Change one decision, Lily forgives. Instead of walks away, Severus chooses her over the Death Eaters, and the web rearranges itself. James is not the man she marries. Sirius is not framed in quite the same way. Dumbledore does not have the same tragic double agent. We're exploring how many other characters were one conversation, one withheld hex, one act of courage away from rewriting everything, and yet we can't escape this. Canon's power is forged in pain. Harry's story matters because of what he loses. Parents, innocence, the fantasy that adults always know what they're doing. This alternate timeline doesn't fix that. It simply reveals that the same world could have held different losses, different forms of courage. A Lily who survives, but watches Severus walk into danger beside her. A Severus who lives but has to raise a child in the shadow of a war he almost helped win for the wrong side. So when we close this what if and return to the books, the invitation is simple. Look at the margins. Look at the girl who laughed with Snape by the river, the boy who chose the word that broke her, the quiet scenes in Spinner's End and Cokeworth and the Hogwarts grounds. Ask yourself, what if this moment bent another way? What if this side character had made a different choice? Let those hidden what-ifs sit beside canon, not to replace it, but to make every line feel more alive, more fragile, more extraordinary. Your turn. Which version of Snape and Lily do you choose? So now it's your turn to stand in that Cokeworth twilight and choose. When you look at Severus Snape, do you hold on to canon's tragic, guilt-driven spy whose every action is penance? Or do you feel pulled toward this version who actually gets to come home to Lily, to love, to partnership? When you picture Lily Evans, do you believe she should have stayed far away from him forever? Or can you imagine her believing in his growth, in the possibility that the boy by the river could become something more profound under her influence? Because this isn't a story about easy wish fulfillment. This is a story about trade-offs. If Lily lives because she marries Severus, are you willing to lose Harry as we know him, the boy who lived, the lightning scar, the entire canon arc built on his name? Or, if you keep Harry, if you keep James and Godric's Hollow, and the Stag Patronus, are you choosing James's happiness over Severus's chance to finally be more than the man who said one unforgivable word? Ask yourself, is giving Severus a happier life worth James's heartbreak? Is saving Lily worth letting the world lose its iconic hero and gaining, perhaps, a quieter, less mythic victory over Voldemort led by different faces? When we're exploring these what-if branches, how do you weigh individual happiness against the power of an extraordinary narrative that shaped your childhood? In the comments, try to go beyond Snape deserved Lily or Lily would never. Which exact canon moments are you using as your evidence? Is it the way she defends him to James by the lake before the slur? The way she walks away after Mudblood? The way his Do Patronus mirrors hers decades later? Does this what-if feel emotionally true to those scenes? Or does it break the connection you always saw there? Put yourself inside the moment. If you were Lily on that Cokeworth night, standing by the river, what would you have needed to hear from Severus to stay? A rejection of the dark arts? A promise to cut ties with future Death Eaters? A real apology for every time he chose power over their bond? If you were James, watching her choose someone else, how would you have coped? Anger, reckless bravado, or a quieter, bitter sort of growing up? And if you were their child, Harry Snape, or a world with no Harry Potter at all, how would you carry their legacy? Would you feel like the proof that love was something worth fighting for, or like the echo of a path that erased a hero? Tell us which timeline you choose, and why. Most importantly, tell us what that choice reveals about the kind of love, and the kind of story you believe in. Hold that answer, because next, we'll examine how your chosen version of Snape and Lily reshapes the war itself. Recap. From Cokeworth swings to a rewritten Hogwarts. So, with that choice hanging in the air, let's look back at the road that brought us here. How did we get from a rusted swing set in Cokeworth to a Hogwarts that barely resembles the castle we know from canon? It began with one night, one word unsaid. In this timeline, Severus doesn't double down after the Mudblood incident. He doesn't sneer, doesn't run back to the shadows. He runs after Lily. He apologizes, truly, and then keeps apologizing with his actions, dropping the worst of the dark arts crowd, letting her see him try. That is the hinge. Because from there, Hogwarts is no longer a straight slide into tragedy. It becomes a slow burn recalibration, a fragile romance that grows between library tables, late-night arguments, and defense practice, where they learn to move together instead of apart. From that bond comes a different war. This isn't a story about a lonely spy atoning in secret. This is a story about two people who choose to fight side by side. Lily doesn't die in Godric's Hollow. There is no Godric's Hollow massacre at all. The Potters live under different protections, because Voldemort never receives the prophecy in quite the same way, and when he does move, the lightning strike falls elsewhere. The prophecy lands on Neville Longbottom. The boy in the crib at the end of July is not Harry Potter, because in one branch, Harry never exists. In that first branch, we're exploring a world with no Harry at all, where Neville grows into the central child hero. The cupboard under the stairs remains just a muggle image from another universe. Instead, there is a quiet greenhouse in Longbottom Manor, a boy raised by a strict but loving grandmother, and a Hogwarts where his courage has to be coaxed into the open. His battle of Hogwarts is different. Severus and Lily are war-hardened partners by then, teachers and order leaders who have survived the first war together and refuse to let this second one claim their students. In the second branch, there is a child, but he is a Snape. A boy or girl raised in a house where the arguments are sharp, the love is fiercer, and the past is never entirely buried. The next generation's story is shaped by a father who is no longer frozen as a tragic reveal, and a mother who refuses to be a martyr. No cupboard, no Dursleys, no myth of the abused savior. Instead, a network of adults, Remus, McGonagall, even a wary Sirius, sharing the burden of resistance. Most importantly, the themes themselves shift. The war is no longer about a single chosen one, absorbing all the pain. It becomes about partnership instead of martyrdom, about destiny rewritten by accumulated choices, 1,000 small, I'm sorry, and I'll stay moments that add up to something more profound than prophecy. It becomes a web of people holding the line together rather than one boy standing alone. And when we look back now at those Cokeworth swings, their chains creaking, Lily's hair bright against the gray, we can see them for what they really were, the fulcrum of two universes. One where she walks away, and a boy named Harry is marked as a living weapon. One where she stays just a little longer, listens a little deeper, and discovers that Severus Snape might actually become something worth fighting for. So, with that journey traced, how does this altered war actually unfold on the ground, battle by battle, choice by choice? CTA, if you'd rewrite one more love story in Hogwarts, which would it be? So, with that journey traced, how does this altered war actually unfold on the ground, battle by battle, choice by choice? That's where you come in, because this isn't a story about one fixed answer. This is a story about how fragile the timeline of the heart really is, and how many different ways it could have broken, or healed. If we've just watched Lily Evans become Lily Snape in your mind, ask yourself, what if we rewrote one more love story in Hogwarts? Would you pull Harry and Hermione together, and let that slow burn bond finally ignite in the common room after the Department of Mysteries? Would you throw Draco and Hermione into a forced alliance in 6th year, when the Vanishing Cabinet and Dumbledore's fate hang between them like a curse? Or would you reach for something more controversial, Remus and Sirius navigating grief, loyalty, and unspoken love from the First Order meeting to the veil in the Department of Mysteries? In the comments, tell us your pairing, but don't stop at the ship. Tell us the moment, the precise choice. Does Harry never write to Ginny in that battered diary because Hermione is already his anchor? Does Draco refuse the Dark Mark because Hermione sees him in the astronomy tower and doesn't look away? Does Sirius survive because Remus refuses, absolutely refuses, to let him go through that arch alone? We're exploring not just who kisses whom, but how a single connection can tilt the war. Would you want a full deep dive on one of those? The same mix of dramatized scenes and close analysis we used here, but focused on another fault line in canon romance. Tell us if you'd prioritize the Marauders era, with young Remus and Sirius in that sunlit Gryffindor dormitory, or the trio era, with Harry and Hermione standing back-to-back in the tent, or even the next generation, where Scorpius and Rose have to live with the ghosts of their surnames. Which era do you think hides the most extraordinary what if? If there's a controversial pairing you've argued about at 3 in the morning, James and Regulus, Draco and Harry, Lily and Remus, drop it below. We'll examine the most compelling ones for future episodes, and most importantly, we'll treat each with the same respect for canon that we brought to Lily and Severus, even when we dare to ask uncomfortable questions. Share this video with the friend who has very strong opinions about Snape, Lily, or James. Not as proof that one side is right, but as a conversation starter. Let it be the thing that turns "she should have chosen" into "what does choice actually mean in a world at war?" If you love long-form, emotionally analytical what-if content that holds canon in one hand while reaching for something more profound with the other, subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep walking these timelines together. Because in the end, the magic isn't just in the spells, it's in the choices. So if you could change one choice at Hogwarts, which heart would you risk, and which world would you build?